When I was little, between the ages of 4 and 7, I lived in a house in South Carolina that I never want to see again. It seemed like an ordinary home, but the experiences I had there were anything but normal. I wasn't the only one who saw things. My mother did too, even if she won't admit it to anyone outside of our family. At the time, I was too young to ask if anyone else in the neighborhood had similar experiences, but what I saw has stayed with me ever since. The most vivid memory I have is of nighttime. A friend once told me what I saw might have been reapers, there to keep bad spirits away. What I remember were dark, shadowy figures. They had no clear outline, but certain parts of the room would appear much darker than others. I'd often see up to 4 of these figures standing near my bed, or sometimes just hovering in my room. I'd hide under my covers, terrified, especially when my mom didn't leave the light on for me. The light was my only comfort. They never appeared when it was on. My mom had her own encounters. She told me about seeing a figure standing in her doorway or watching things crawl down the walls. Even though we both experienced these things, we rarely spoke about them back then. Another memory from that house still gives me chills. Every time I walked by the bathroom, I'd catch a glimpse out of the corner of my eye of someone sitting on the toilet, smiling at me. It sounds ridiculous, but it felt deeply unsettling. The hallway itself was just as eerie. Every time I walked down it, I'd hear my name being called faintly, as if from the back of my mind. To this day, I can't remember if the voice was male or female. Things didn't stop at night either. Our backyard was massive, but once the sun went down, I'd see dark shapes moving along the back fence. Sometimes, I'd hear 2 or 3 voices calling my name, beckoning me to come outside. One of the strangest things that happened in that house was something I brought on myself. As a child, I wanted to get out of school and remembered my babysitter once talking about voodoo dolls. Inspired, I made my own. Using a pipe cleaner, I wrapped a strand of my hair around it and dotted it with red marker, asking for chicken pox so I wouldn't have to go to school. 3 days later, I broke out in chicken pox. No one around me had it, so I couldn't have caught it from anyone. To this day, I'm not sure if it was a spirit granting my wish or if I had some kind of power I didn't understand. All the strange occurrences stopped when my sister was born. That, however, brought its own unnerving moments. My mom told me that when my sister was just a baby, she would stand in her crib, staring silently at my mom without moving. Years later, when we moved to Vegas and lived on an old military base, the paranormal experiences started again. My brother complained about being choked in his bedroom one night. He said he felt a weight on his bed, and then his throat was squeezed. Around the same time, my computer began acting strangely. It would turn on by itself and I'd hear typing as if someone was using it. It always opened Microsoft Word. I joked with my brother, saying, "Maybe we have ghosts, yours is the bad one and mine's the good one, like yin and yang." I called mine good because one day, when I stayed home sick from school, I had an experience that felt more confusing than frightening. I was lying in bed, ready to fall asleep, with the windows closed, the door shut, and no air conditioning on. Suddenly, I felt a powerful gust of air blast into my face. My hair blew back, and my whole body went cold and numb. My ears popped, and when I opened my eyes, I looked around the room, terrified. The sensation left me tingling, like when your limbs fall asleep and wake back up. Just as I tried to calm myself and drift off again, it happened a second time. My computer turned on again, and I could hear it whirring as if someone were using it. Frustrated and tired, I said aloud, "Let me sleep, for crying out loud." After that, it stopped and I finally got some rest. Even now, I'm unsure of what that was. Was it trying to possess me, or was it trying to communicate? The coldness and the gusts of wind were so intense, yet I never felt unsafe in that room. In fact, I often felt strangely comforted there, even when I heard voices calling my name. Instead of being afraid, their calls made me smile. Looking back, I still don't fully understand those experiences, but they've stayed with me, shaping my sense of the unknown and leaving me with more questions than answers. This happened to me last year when tragedy struck our family. I feel like I need to give some background to do this story justice. I'm part of a large, close-knit extended family in California. I grew up on the East Coast, away from this side of the family with just my parents and brother. But 3 years ago, I moved to California, and it's been a new and wonderful experience for me, building strong bonds with my cousins, aunts, and uncles. It's a family where no matter what you're going through, someone is always there to support you. So when my cousin Gene, not his real name, died in a car crash in Las Vegas, it devastated us all. He was only 23. That morning, a group of cousins and I were waking up after a night out in Los Angeles when we got the call. We quickly rallied the family and drove to Las Vegas in 3 cars. When we arrived at his mother's house, the front yard was packed with friends and family. The scene was chaotic. People were either crying hysterically or sitting in stunned silence. I hadn't known Gene as long as my other cousins, having only been close to him for about 2 years. So while I felt the loss, it wasn't as overwhelming for me as it was for those who had grown up with him. As the night went on, I decided to give my cousins space and left with an aunt and uncle to their home. They lived nearby with their 3 boys, and I stayed in their guest room downstairs while their bedrooms were upstairs. I struggled to sleep that night, drifting in and out of restless dreams. But at one point, something extraordinary happened. Whether I was asleep and dreaming or somewhere between awake and asleep, I can't say, but I vividly remember walking into the guest room where I was staying. In this vision, I saw my cousin Gene. He was sitting across from someone, playing a guitar. Though I couldn't see his face, I recognized him instantly by his Lakers jersey and matching hat. I walked up to him, hugged him tightly, and said, "Dog, you don't have to go. Everyone needs you here. Don't go." When I turned to see his face, I woke up. But I didn't fully wake up. I was in sleep paralysis. I couldn't move, open my eyes, or even breathe properly. I felt a heavy presence in the room. I wanted desperately to wake up and see him one last time, but I was trapped. When I finally managed to break free, I jumped out of bed and scanned the room. Nothing. I sat back down, trying to calm myself, but then I heard something outside. First, it sounded like faint howling, like wolves. Living in Southern California, I was used to hearing coyotes occasionally, so it didn't strike me as strange at first. But as I listened more closely, it began to sound different. Less like howls and more like children crying. I thought it might be my little cousins, so I crept upstairs to check on them. Their bedroom doors were open, and they were fast asleep. Confused, I went to the kitchen for a drink, still hearing the sound faintly in the background. The howling grew louder as I stood by the sliding glass door to the backyard. Looking outside, all I could see was the faint glow of a streetlight beyond the brick fence and the light fog that hovered around it. The sound continued, eerie and unsettling, but I couldn't see anything. Then, as suddenly as it began, the howling started to fade. Not abruptly, like an animal might stop, but slowly, almost deliberately, until it was gone. Still shaken, I returned to the guest room. Wanting to distract myself, I turned on the TV and let the droning voice of an infomercial lull me to sleep. The next morning at breakfast, I casually asked my uncle if the kids had been crying during the night. He said no. Then I asked if they often got coyotes or wolves nearby. Again, he said no, explaining that coyotes rarely venture that far into the desert, and wolves are practically unheard of. As he said this, the hair on the back of his neck stood up, and so did mine. I've heard stories of loved ones visiting people after they've passed, but I've never experienced anything like this. Was it Gene trying to reach out? Or was it something else? I still don't know how to interpret what happened that night, but it's something I'll never forget. This happened to me when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and it remains one of the most vivid paranormal experiences I've ever had. I'm now 20, but I remember the event as clearly as if it happened yesterday. Some people might doubt a child's ability to recall such things, but I've always had an exceptionally sharp memory, even from as far back as when I was 3 years old. At the time, I was in first grade, attending a school where the classrooms weren't part of a single large building. Instead, they were spread out in smaller, detached structures. Each building housed 1 or 2 classrooms, sometimes with a shared bathroom in the middle. The music building, where this event occurred, was small. Just 1 classroom with no bathroom and only 1 door in and out. This detail is important, as you'll see later. That day, My class had just entered the music room and sat down in a semicircle on the floor. The teacher sat in a chair in front of us, singing a song. I was seated at the far end of the semicircle, farthest from the door, giving me a clear view of it. The teacher's desk was pushed against the wall near the door, with a large chair next to it. When we entered the room, the chair was empty. About halfway through the lesson, something caught my eye. I looked toward the chair, and to my surprise, there was a woman sitting in it. She didn't seem out of place at first. She looked entirely normal, solid and tangible, like any other adult. She had light brown hair that looked like it had been braided the day before, loose, even waves that framed her face. Her skin was lightly tanned, and she seemed to be in her early 30s. She was thin and casually dressed in jeans and a light sweater, which I think was brown. But then I noticed the child on her lap. The boy looked completely different from her. His skin was paper white, almost unnatural, and he had dark circles under his closed eyes, as though he were sleeping. He looked about 3 or 4 years old and was dressed in heavy winter clothing. Snow boots, thick pants, a coat, and a winter hat. He was wrapped tightly in a knitted blanket, and his mouth hung slightly open. The woman gently rocked him back and forth, her movements slow and rhythmic. At the time, I was too young to fully understand what I was seeing. I just knew that she wasn't a teacher, her casual clothes made that obvious, and that the boy couldn't be a student. But I didn't think much more of it. I was just a little girl, and these details didn't stand out as strange to me then. Looking back now, it's clear that neither of them belonged in that room or even on this plane of existence. The woman sat completely unnoticed by anyone else, including the teacher. The classroom doors were heavy and loud, making a distinct noise whenever they opened or closed. If she had entered through the door, I would have seen it, and everyone else would have heard it. But there was no sound. She simply appeared. What struck me most was her expression or lack of one. Her face was blank, neither happy nor sad, as she stared in my direction. But she wasn't looking at me. She was looking through me, as though I wasn't even there. She didn't seem aware of the teacher, the students, or the lesson taking place around her. The boy remained motionless the entire time. He didn't stir or react, and the woman just kept rocking him, her gaze fixed on nothing. Despite her clear visibility, no one else in the room noticed her. Not the teacher, not the students sitting with a clear view of her. She stayed in that chair for the entire lesson, and when we left the room, she was still sitting there, silently rocking the child. This didn't happen just once. I saw her again later in the school year, on another warm day. I remember this detail because I was dressed in summer clothes both times. Yet, the boy was always bundled in heavy winter attire, which made no sense. This was southern Nevada, where even in winter, temperatures rarely call for such clothing. Snow is rare, and when it does happen, it's fleeting. To this day, I have no idea who they were or why they were there. The boy was too young to have ever been a student at my school, and I've never found a logical explanation for what I saw. The woman and the child were as real and solid as anyone else in that room, yet they clearly didn't belong. I often wonder about them. Why were they there? What were they trying to convey? Or were they simply echoes of something long past, playing out in a place they once knew? I may never have answers, but this experience has stayed with me, as vivid now as it was then. This story is a bit complicated to tell, but I'll do my best to explain it. To start, I should mention that I've had recurring dreams about a guardian spirit throughout my life. In these dreams, he would guide me through challenges, give me strength, or explain things I couldn't understand while I was awake. These dreams became a constant when I lived in a particular house, a mobile home where I later learned someone had died. For 7 years, I lived away from my childhood home, where I reside now. During that time, my family rented a mobile home from a woman who told us her mother had passed away there. She described her mother as a kind, petite old woman who had been suffering from emphysema. She explained that her mother had died peacefully, surrounded by family. With that reassurance, my family didn't see any issue with moving in. By the time I was 17, I was living there with my best friend, while my mom and brother lived in another house on the same property. At first, the experiences I had in the house were gentle and unthreatening, Light footsteps in the hall, the occasional flicker of lights turning on during the night. I knew it was the old woman's spirit, but she never felt harmful or frightening. Then things began to change. My friend worked nights, leaving me alone most evenings. My bedroom was close to the front door, and since I didn't have curtains, I covered my window with posters to block anyone from seeing in, or me from seeing out. It started with strange dreams. In these dreams, my guardian spirit would be on the roof of the house, on his hands and knees, knocking as if the roof were a door. He'd say things like, "That's not me on the porch," or "Don't open the door." These dreams only lasted a few seconds, but every time, I'd wake up to loud noises outside. The sound of heavy footsteps stomping on the front porch or something running and leaping onto it from the ground. At first, I thought it might be a large dog. But as the nights went on, the disturbances became more violent. The stomping or running was followed by loud bangs on the front door, or the doorknob rattling as if someone was trying to force it open. It was terrifying. On top of that, I'd sometimes hear light footsteps on the tin roof, adding to the fear. What puzzled me was that the back door, much weaker and easier to breach, was never touched. It was always the front porch and front door that bore the brunt of these attacks. Nearly every night, my guardian spirit would return in my dreams to warn me, "That's not me," or "Don't open the door." When my friend was home, he sometimes slept through the commotion, but occasionally he'd wake up and ask what was happening. I'd whisper something like, "I don't know, but please don't open the door," or "Stay in my room tonight because I'm scared." On those nights, I clung to my cats for comfort. They heard the noises too, turning their heads toward the sound, but they didn't seem particularly bothered. If they were already settled, they stayed relaxed, which was oddly reassuring. Despite the terrifying activity, I never once saw anything. There were no shadows through the window coverings, no scratches or dents on the door the next morning, and no sign of a physical intruder. We even had a peephole in the front door, but I was too frightened to ever get out of bed to look through it. To this day, I can't explain what was happening. I knew it wasn't the spirit of the old woman. She was gentle, and I had already felt her presence inside the house. Whatever this was felt entirely different, menacing, relentless, and intent on getting in. My guardian's warnings in the dreams only added to the sense that this was something dangerous, something I shouldn't face directly. What do you think it could have been? The lack of physical evidence makes it even more baffling. Whatever it was, I'm grateful I never opened the door. This happened when I was about 5 or 6 months pregnant with my son, living in a small trailer park with my husband, Brandon. It was right before we got married, in a tiny town with a population of less than 2,000. In a place like that, everyone knows everyone, and when someone passes away, it's common knowledge. Nobody had died in our trailer, and I'm certain we would have known if there had been a death there. One cloudy afternoon, somewhere between noon and 2 p.m., Brandon and I were sitting on the porch steps, enjoying the cool, overcast weather. We both love rainy days, so we were outside, waiting to see if the rain would start. Everything was calm and quiet until, for no apparent reason, Brandon and I both stopped talking and turned our heads at the same time toward our car. Our Hyundai Sonata was parked about 10 feet away. On the windshield, we saw them, 3 people. It wasn't like they were standing in front of the car. Instead, their images were reflected in the glass, as though they were right there, staring directly at the windshield. The figures looked solid but slightly misty, probably because windshields don't make perfect mirrors. There was nobody actually standing near the car, yet their images were there, perfectly visible, as though painted on the glass like a decal. The people didn't move. They stood frozen, their faces serious but with an air of boredom, as if they'd been waiting a long time. The first figure was an elderly man, very heavy-set and bald. He reminded me of ex-President Taft, dressed in a formal suit that looked slightly too tight around the collar. His double chin pushed out uncomfortably, as though the suit had been fitted years ago when he was thinner. He appeared to be about 70 years old. The second figure was a woman in a bright red dress or tank top made of a silky material. The red was vivid, the only color that stood out against the otherwise muted tones. The dress didn't fit her properly. It was too loose. She was thin, with stringy, limp brown hair that hung down to her chest. Her face was angular, and she had visible scars on her cheeks, the kind that made me think she might have struggled with meth addiction in the past. The third figure was another man, probably a couple of years older than the woman. He was thin and partially balding, with a big nose and thin lips. Like the first man, he wore a formal suit. What struck me as odd was how gray both men looked, as though they'd been pulled from an old black and white photograph. The woman, on the other hand, had color in her hair and dress, making her stand out even more. I broke the silence. "Babe, are you seeing what I'm seeing?" Brandon nodded. "Yeah, I think so." To make sure, we described the figures to each other. Every detail we mentioned was identical. There was no mistaking it. We were both seeing the same three people. For about 3 minutes, we sat there staring at them. They stayed perfectly still, their images clear and unmoving. Then, slowly, they began to fade. At first, I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. Maybe it was a reflection of clouds? But clouds don't have color. Not vivid red or brown. They're gray or white. Whatever we saw was no natural phenomenon. To this day, I can't explain who those people were or why they appeared in our windshield. They didn't seem threatening, just out of place, like fragments of another time or reality momentarily overlapping with ours. When I was a child, I often heard my name being called. It always sounded like my mom, but when I'd ask her what she needed, she'd say she hadn't called me. I slept with my bed against the wall, usually with my back to it, convinced that things under the bed were waiting to grab me. Our dog, Tip, yes, not the most original name, would sometimes bark at night, and I believed I could quiet him down by telling him to stop, telepathically. Whether it worked or not, who knows, but I often ended up at the foot of my parents' bed by the end of the night, without ever knowing why. As I got older, those childhood experiences faded, but they seemed to resurface during pivotal moments in my life. One such moment was when I was pregnant with my daughter, and another occurred when we visited my mom for her 75th birthday. What I want to share now are the strange events that began after we returned to Las Vegas. During our visit to my mom's, she graciously lent us her car so we could visit the grave of my daughter's father, who had passed away before she was born. Circumstances had prevented me from taking her there before. On the way, we also visited the grave of a 16-year-old girl my grandmother's uncle had tragically murdered in 1832. I don't know why, but I've always felt compelled to visit her grave and apologize on behalf of my family. It's well known that she haunts the cemetery, but that didn't stop us. When we found her grave, my kids and I knelt there, paying our respects. My granddaughter, Zoe, then asked my daughter, "Can the little girl come home with us?" My daughter firmly replied, "No, Zoe. She has to stay here." But Zoe insisted. She says she wants to come home with me. Zoe was only 3 at the time, and we'd never spoken about this to her. How she knew about the girl is beyond me. I suspect the girl may have followed us home anyway, as you'll see from the events that followed. In June or July of that same year, my son Brandon and I had gone to Walmart and were driving home around 8:30 p.m. As we navigated the winding streets of our neighborhood, a car started tailgating us. Feeling mischievous, I slowed down. Admit it, we've all done it. When I pulled into our driveway, I gave the driver a hand signal everyone knows. No need to elaborate. And he shouted something vulgar back at me. Here's where it gets weird. As I pulled the car into the garage, the door, fully open before we left, suddenly closed behind us. I asked Brandon, "What's the matter? Are you scared?" He replied calmly, "No." "Why?" "Then why did you shut the door so fast?" I asked. "I thought you did." We were baffled. My husband and youngest son were both inside the house. One sleeping, the other on the computer upstairs. There was no way they could have closed it. The only opener was in my truck, and neither Brandon nor I had touched it. The door closing on its own left us both spooked. A few weeks later, I was trying to quit smoking and would step outside for a cigarette to avoid bothering my husband, who had just quit after a small heart attack. One evening, I unlocked the double French doors in our bedroom to step out, but they wouldn't budge. I tried locking and unlocking them multiple times, pulling as hard as I could, but the doors felt like they were being held shut. Frustrated, I asked my husband to help. He casually walked over, turned the knob, and opened the door with no effort. By mid-October, most of the strange occurrences had died down, but one morning brought an experience I'll never forget. It was early, probably around 4 a.m., and I was in the kitchen, waiting for my coffee. On a shelf above the counter sat a stack of pictures we'd taken in Ohio during our visit to the cemeteries. As I stood there, several pictures suddenly slid off the shelf, 3 of them landing face down on the floor. In my mind, I saw vivid flashes of 3 images, one of Brandon and my granddaughter in my mom's car at the cemetery, another of the hospital where my boys were born, and the third of my daughter's father's headstone. When I picked up the pictures, they were exactly the ones I'd envisioned. At the time, I thought it was a warning about Brandon, who was living on his own. But on Thanksgiving Day, I learned the truth. My mom had been hospitalized after nearly bleeding to death due to ulcers and a reaction to blood thinners. Looking back, the images made sense. Her car, the hospital, and his headstone were all connected. These experiences, while unsettling at times, have left me more curious than scared. I'm still unsure if the girl from the cemetery came home with us or if something else has been trying to send messages. Whatever the case, these events remind me how connected we are to the unseen, even if we don't always understand it. This story begins in 2008, shortly after a visit to Ohio in May of that year. That summer and fall, there was a lot of strange activity in our house, some of which I've shared before. What I want to tell now is what happened afterward, during the holidays, when my husband and I tried to lift my holiday blues. I tend to get homesick around the holidays, so my husband always does his best to make things festive. That year, we needed a new Christmas tree because our old one, a fake tree, was shedding needles. It was so old it was practically disintegrating. We picked up a cheap replacement from Walmart, but it was the ugliest thing. Shiny plastic needles that looked fake even from across the room. It was all we could afford at the time, though, so it had to do. Every year in that house, we'd find broken ornaments under the tree. The room was carpeted, and we kept a gate across the doorway to keep the dogs out, so there was no explanation for it. In the kitchen, we had a wire sculpture hanging over the entrance that looked like a forest in winter. We decorated it with string lights and small ornaments, plugging it into an outlet near my son's bedroom upstairs. Still, ornaments from that sculpture would occasionally end up broken on the floor by the kitchen, as if something had knocked them off. Sometimes I'd wake up in the morning to find the Christmas tree lit, even though I was certain I'd turned it off before going to bed. My husband had also picked up a nearly life-sized singing Santa at a garage sale. It had a motion sensor and could sing 8 or 10 songs, though we never let it get that far. It liked to start singing on its own, which was enough to creep us out. That Christmas, after we'd finished opening presents and were cleaning up, I joked, "What about the ghosties? Did anyone get the ghosties a present?" No sooner had I said that when we heard a loud crash. A broken ornament was lying under the wire sculpture in the kitchen. We were all in the living room when it happened. Unfortunately, like so many others, we lost our house to foreclosure and began the difficult process of moving in January. By February, we had found a nice rental nearby and were packing up. During that month, the garage door kept acting up. It would close on its own at the most unexpected times, as though the house itself didn't want us to leave. On the last day we were there, it closed 3 times while we were loading up. My son JR joked, "Our ghost friends don't want us to go." I called out to the air, "You guys can come with us if you want to." I repeated this as I walked through each room, saying goodbye to our home. A few weeks after settling into the new house, my husband held a garage sale. I wasn't sure if our ghost friends had followed us, as I hadn't noticed anything unusual. That day, I sat in the back of the garage talking with my stepdaughter while my husband showed a man and his son some keyboards he was selling. Suddenly, the garage door started coming down over the man and his son. My husband ran over, pulled the boy out of the way, and lifted the door back up. He apologized, baffled, and said he had no idea why it happened. I, however, was giggling to myself. No one else found it funny. Santa was for sale that day too, but unsurprisingly, no one bought him. Over the rest of the year, there were smaller incidents. The washer became unplugged on its own. The light we left on for the dogs in the family room turned off by itself, even though I distinctly remembered turning it on. Once, while waiting for my coffee early in the morning, several photos we had taken in Ohio fell from a shelf in the kitchen. 3 of them landed on the floor face down, and in my mind, I saw flashes of 3 specific images. One of Brandon and my granddaughter in my mom's car at the cemetery, another of the hospital where my sons were born, and the third of my daughter's father's headstone. When I picked up the photos, they were exactly the ones I had envisioned. At the time, I thought it was a warning about Brandon, but on Thanksgiving, my brother called to say my mom had nearly died from internal bleeding due to an ulcer. Looking back, the images made sense. Her car, the hospital, and the headstone seemed to be connected. That Christmas, we discovered our tree from the previous year was too small for the new house. We put it in the family room by the fireplace and got a larger one for the living room. My husband decorated the mantel with garland, stockings, and lights, plugging it all in with a remote-controlled extension cord for convenience. One day, after cleaning and mopping the living room floor, we went upstairs to let it dry. Suddenly, we heard a loud thump, followed by Santa singing. My son Brandon called out to the motion-sensing Santa, trying to trigger it again, but nothing happened, until Santa turned toward him and started singing, "Well, the weather outside is frightful." Brandon threw up his hands and ran back upstairs while I laughed until I cried. My husband, ever the skeptic, went down and unplugged Santa, calling it a coincidence. Throughout the season, the Christmas trees continued to mysteriously turn on by themselves. One morning, as I sipped coffee at 2:45 a.m., I watched the family room tree suddenly light up. Brandon had just come home, and we looked for the remote, only to find it buried under 2 baseball caps on top of the unplugged water cooler. My husband claimed it must have been interference from garage door openers or radio waves. Sure. That year, as I placed small crocheted stockings on the tree, I told our ghost friends, "These are for you. Please don't break any ornaments this year." They didn't. It was October 19th, 2009, and the desert wind had been howling for the last 24 hours. A typical occurrence for this time of year in Las Vegas. But what wasn't typical were the strange sounds we heard that night, along with something my daughter claimed to have seen. Now I can't stop wondering what it all could mean. I'd love to hear any theories. It started late that evening. I was just drifting off to sleep when I suddenly heard a male voice whisper, "Hello?" right into my ear. The sound seemed to move, starting behind my ear and sweeping toward my face, like someone rushing past me in the dark. Startled, I sat up and looked toward the bedroom door. My son Brandon was standing there, looking uneasy. "Did you hear that?" he asked. "Hear what?" I replied. "Someone screaming," he said. "Or maybe a loud moan." Brandon explained that he had been downstairs in the kitchen with his brother JR when he heard it. The sound seemed to come from the backyard, and since our bedroom window faces that direction, he thought maybe my husband and I were watching a horror movie. It was October after all, but we weren't watching anything like that. My husband was sleeping with the television on, as usual, but the show playing was nothing remotely spooky. I asked Brandon and JR to describe what they heard, but they couldn't quite put it into words. "It was like a scream," Brandon said. "But not really." I suggested that the wind might be carrying sounds from outside, or maybe it was just someone in the neighborhood messing around in their backyard. They heard it 2 more times before they went to bed. Around 3:15 a.m., I was getting my work clothes from the laundry room when I heard it myself. It's hard to describe, but the best comparison I can think of is the sound someone makes when they're pinched, sharp, high-pitched, and quick, like an abrupt HH. I froze, trying to figure out where it was coming from. It sounded like it came from the patio, right outside the family room window. Curious, I decided to investigate. At first, I thought it might be a cat, but our dogs, who usually go berserk at the sight of the neighborhood cat, were lying calmly on the couch, wide awake but not nervous. I didn't hear any scraping, nothing was blowing around, and there was no sign of a cat. I walked through the backyard, peeking over fences, but the whole neighborhood seemed quiet and empty. I was at a loss. The next day, I told my daughter about the strange sound. She listened intently and then said, "That's weird because I saw a little girl last night. I felt a chill." She explained that she had been in the living room when she went to the kitchen for a glass of water. As she glanced down the hall, she saw a little girl standing at the corner where my granddaughter Zoe's room is. Assuming it was Zoe, she told her to go back to bed and went about getting her water. But on her way back to the living room, she saw the girl again, this time peeking around the corner. Curious, she placed her glass on the counter and walked into Zoe's room to check. Zoe was sound asleep, snoring and even drooling. Even a 4-year-old can fake a snore, my daughter said. But they don't fake slobber. Leslie then asked me, what time did the boys hear the noise? I told her, you first. She said, around 10:30. That was the same time Brandon and JR had heard the sound in the backyard. Now, I can't help but wonder, did we all experience the same thing in different ways? Did we encounter separate phenomena that happened to occur at the same time? Or was it all just coincidence? Whatever the case, when I moved to Vegas and lived in some old military housing on base, strange things started happening. My brother had been complaining about being choked in his sleep. He said he felt a heavy weight pressing down on him, pinning him to the bed and cutting off his air. At the same time, my computer began acting up. It would turn on by itself, and I'd hear the sound of typing before it opened Microsoft Word. Half-jokingly, I told my brother, maybe we have ghosts. Yours is the bad one and mine's the good one, like yin and yang. The reason I called mine good was because of an experience I had one day while I was homesick from school. I was lying in bed with the windows closed, the door shut, and the air conditioning off. Just as I was about to drift off, I felt a powerful gust of air hit my face. My hair blew back, and my whole body went cold and numb. My ears popped, and when I opened my eyes, I looked around, freaking out. My body tingled, like the sensation you get when your limbs fall asleep. I tried to calm myself and go back to sleep, but it happened again. A second rush of air, the same cold, tingling feeling, and my ears popping. At the same time, my computer turned on again. Annoyed and tired, I finally said aloud, let me sleep for crying out loud. After that, it stopped and I fell asleep. To this day, I'm not sure what that was. Part of me thinks it was trying to tell me something or maybe even trying to possess me. Yet, despite the cold and the strange occurrences, I always felt safe in my room. The presence, whatever it was, never scared me. In fact, hearing my name called in those moments made me smile rather than feel afraid. During this time, my brother continued having nightmares and episodes of being choked or held down in his sleep. I remember one night standing in his room as he cried and thrashed in his bed. Strangely, I felt a comfortable presence in the room with me, and I couldn't help but smile, even as he struggled. I believed it was my good spirit watching over me. Eventually, the presence left. I think it happened because I let negativity take over my life. I made poor choices and got into bad habits, and whatever had been with me seemed to disappear. Recently, I started talking to a Wiccan friend who has become my mentor. We've developed a unique connection. We can sense each other's emotions without even speaking. It's hard to explain, but it's like a spiritual link between us. This weekend, I watched Paranormal Activity and found myself wondering what I would do if the strange events from my past started happening again. Innocently, I thought about wanting to experience it once more, now that I'm older and more curious. 2 days later, my Wiccan friend told me she was experiencing a haunting at her house. She described hearing a voice calling her name and objects falling from her bed. Her description of the voice worried me. It sounded just like the one I used to hear. That day, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to me. The next morning, I called my boyfriend and told him about my concerns. As I started explaining, I heard a strange voice on the phone. It didn't sound human, more like a snarl mixed with unintelligible words. The only thing I could barely make out was what sounded like the S word. The voice was faint but persistent, cutting through the call like background noise on his side of the phone. I asked him if someone was in the room with him or if he had something playing in the background, but he insisted he was alone, and there was nothing on. He couldn't hear the voice at all and started asking if I was okay. The voice would grow louder when he spoke and quieter when he stopped. Something about it made me feel deeply unsettled, and I started crying. When I finally told him what was happening, the voice disappeared. Now I'm left wondering if the same entity or energy from my past has returned, and if it's affecting not just me, but those around me. I want to spend the night at my Wiccan friend's house to see if the activity has anything to do with me. If it's the same thing, it seems to harm people around me but never me directly. Years ago, I promised myself that if this ever happened again, I would try to figure out what it was. Now that it's happening, I'm determined to keep that promise. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. My name is Leslie. I'm 27 years old, and I live in Las Vegas. My family moved here from Ohio when I was 10, my mom, stepdad, and 2 little brothers. The experience I'm about to share happened shortly after I turned 13, and it's something I'll never forget. For a little background, my biological father, John Leslie, passed away on September 7, 1982. I was born just a few weeks later on September 27th, so I never got to meet him. Growing up, all I ever heard was how much I looked and acted like him. It was a Saturday night, and I was feeling unusually tired, so I decided to go to bed early. I followed my usual routine, brushed my teeth, grabbed a drink of water, and flopped into bed. For some reason, I always looked at the clock before going to sleep. It was 10:52 p.m. I closed my eyes and began to drift off, but a few minutes later, I heard someone enter my room. I assumed it was my mom checking on me. I wasn't exactly a model kid at the time, so I figured she was making sure I hadn't snuck out or gotten into trouble. But when I turned to look, it wasn't my mom. It was a man I'd never seen before in my life, closing the door behind him. He had dark, medium-length hair, a black Harley-Davidson t-shirt, dirty blue jeans, and black boots. Strangely, I wasn't scared. In fact, I felt calm, almost happy to see him, though I couldn't explain why. He walked over to my bed and sat on the edge, just looking at me for what felt like a long time. Then he gently stroked my cheek with the back of his fingers. His voice was calm and warm as he spoke. "You should be more respectful to your mom," he said. "She's having a hard time with you." He paused, then added, "I love you very much, and I want you to tell your mom that I love her too, and miss her more than she could ever know." At the time, I had no idea what he meant, but it didn't matter. I was so comfortable and at peace that I couldn't move or even respond. It felt like hours passed as he sat there, stroking my face, and we just stared at each other. Then he leaned in, kissed my forehead, and said, "Good night, Petey." The name Petey jolted me. My mom used to call me that when I was little. As soon as he closed the door behind him, I sat straight up in bed, wide-eyed. That's when I noticed the clock. It still read 10:52 p.m. Even more strange, the side of my face where he had stroked me wasn't warm, as it should have been. Instead, it was ice cold, like I'd been holding an ice pack against it for too long. Freaked out, I went into the kitchen, grabbed one of my mom's cigarettes, and started scrubbing the grout and tile with a toothbrush and bleach. Anything to keep myself distracted. I was crying the whole time, trying to make sense of what had just happened. When my mom woke up around 3 a.m., I told her everything. By the time I finished, she was in tears too. She said, "That man who came to see you was your father." I didn't believe her at first, so she went to her closet and pulled out an old Bible with a zippered cover. Inside were pictures of a man I'd never seen before. A man who looked exactly like the one who had been in my room. "That's your dad," she said. "He came to visit you. Don't be scared. He loves you, and I guess he thought you were old enough not to freak out." She smiled a little as she added, "Guess he was wrong, huh? I love my mom. I haven't had another experience like that since, though I've had other strange occurrences over the years. What's really cool, though, is that my daughter Zoe, who's now 5, has a few imaginary friends. One of them is named John. When Zoe was about 2, she described John to me, and it gave me chills. Her description matched exactly how I described my dad. She says he kisses her on the forehead before she goes to sleep sometimes. Cool. Huh? I'm a serious 17-year-old, so please don't dismiss what I'm about to share just because of my age. A couple of years ago, I went through a really tough time after finding out my father was dying. What I'm going to tell you is part of a two-sided story. This is the good side. During that time, there was a dark presence in our house. Everyone, even the dog, could feel it. I've always been sensitive to spirits, and this one made me sick. I couldn't sleep at night, and even during the day, I could barely function. 3 days into this nightmare, my room changed. It became a sanctuary, a place where I could finally breathe again. The overwhelming freedom I felt when I was there was incredible, though I didn't understand why. Even my mom noticed it and said the dark feeling seemed to leave the house entirely. But the sense of peace in my room stayed for months. One day, I was in my room, probably reading or drawing, when I got up and saw a man standing by my closet. He wasn't scary. In fact, I knew right away that he was the reason for the calm in my room. I didn't feel fear, just a sense of comfort that I hadn't felt in weeks. I only got a glimpse of him, but his image is burned into my memory. He was tall, probably over 6 feet, with dark brown hair and dark eyes. He looked middle-aged and slightly scruffy, like he hadn't shaved in a day or two. I'd never seen him before in my life. I described him to my mom because she knows a lot about ghosts, but she didn't recognize him either. I saw him a few more times, always near my closet door. He never gave me that unsettling someone's watching me feeling. Instead, his presence felt protective. He was like a calm, steady presence in our chaotic lives. Even my family noticed the comfort he brought, though my dad, oddly, didn't seem to like him. One morning, I saw him by the olive tree in our backyard. He was standing there, facing the house, around 7 a.m. when I went to grab breakfast. My mom was in the kitchen too, so I told her to look out the window, not saying why in case he wasn't there and I'd look foolish. But she saw him too. All she said was, "That's him." I just rolled my eyes and said, "No duh, Mom." But I was relieved she'd seen him too. The last time anyone saw him was my mom. I'd been having trouble sleeping again, and it was around 11 p.m. She was walking past my room on her way to the bathroom when she saw him sitting on the edge of my bed. He looked like he was watching over me. She said he was wearing old army drab clothing, and I looked incredibly peaceful, like I hadn't had a single worry. After that, he was around off and on for the next 3 years. I grew so used to him that I could tell the moment I walked into a room whether he was there. I'd talk to him, tell him stories, and even though he never responded, I could feel that he was listening. He became like a friend, silent, but always present when I needed him. Now he's gone, and I miss him terribly. It's been about a year since he left, and it feels like I've lost a part of myself. I've always had trouble sleeping and been scared of the dark, but with him around, those fears melted away. He felt like a guardian, someone who brought peace to a chaotic time in my life. Even my mom and sisters miss him. The things in my house now are driving me up the wall, and without him I feel lost. I don't know if he'll ever come back. I've asked him to many times. Has he moved on? Is he gone for good? I feel selfish for wanting him back, but at the same time I feel like a lost little kid without him. Do you think he'll return? Or has he done what he needed to do and moved on to wherever spirits go? I miss my ghostly friend more than I can put into words. It might sound silly, but it's how I feel. I think my guardian appeared because of what was happening with my dad. My father wasn't the best person, and for a time he had an angry ghost stalking him. I don't know exactly why, but I always felt it was connected to the way he had lived his life, his anger and the way he treated people. This presence was utterly terrifying for everyone in the house, including the dog. I was the first one to see it. It was a dark shadow, hunched over on my dad's bed, elbows resting on its knees, just waiting. That's all it ever did, wait. It followed my dad everywhere but never physically harmed anyone. Still, its presence was enough to fill the house with dread. None of us could stand being alone in the house when it was around. Once, my sisters and I spent the night away, and my parents were left alone. They started talking about the presence in the front room. Both of my parents have always been very in tune with ghosts, far more so than I've ever been, even with my sensitivity. They'd noticed the ghost following my dad, just as I had, and my dad decided to test its limits. He convinced my mom to race it to his bedroom. At first, my mom was hesitant, afraid like the rest of us. But with some prodding, she agreed. They ran down the hallway together, but the ghost moved faster, passed through both of them and beat them to the bedroom. Having this entity go through you was horrifying. My mom burst into tears immediately. I had only experienced it once myself, and the despair and cold it brought with it were overwhelming. It was like all the warmth and hope in the world were sucked out in an instant. Despite this, the ghost never hurt us physically. It was just there, always waiting, always watching. The presence stayed until my dad couldn't take it anymore. In a fit of anger, he banished it from the house. My dad's word was oddly powerful when it came to the supernatural, and for some reason it worked. I'd seen it before with another ghost I had befriended, who had also been banned from the property. For reasons I don't fully understand, my dad's commands were like law. Ghosts couldn't cross the property line without significant effort or my mom's help. Looking back, I wonder if the ghost was more than just an angry spirit. My dad was dying during this time, and I can't help but think it might have been something else entirely. Could it have been a collector or maybe even a grim reaper of sorts? It didn't hurt us, but its presence set all of us on edge. The only person it truly seemed to affect was my dad, who was absolutely terrified of it. I'm left wondering if it came for him, waiting for the right moment, or if it was a manifestation of something darker tied to his life. Whatever it was, it never gave us answers, only questions. I lost my fiancé on July 9, 2010. He was the love of my life, my teenage sweetheart, the first man who told me, "I love you," and the one I made plans to spend forever with. We started dating when we were young, and after only a few months, he asked me to marry him. Though life pulled us apart several times over the last 12 years, we always found our way back to each other. Our connection was intense and undeniable. I could always sense when he was in the room, and when I turned around, there he'd be. We finally reunited last July after 5 years apart, both of us more mature and ready to commit. We spoke every day about marriage and building a life together, beautiful babies and all. The night before he passed, he was especially tender. He told me that one day we'd reach a point where we could communicate psychically with each other. I never thought it would happen after his death. Losing him has been the hardest thing I've ever endured. When his mother called me to tell me the news, I was in shock. Together, the two women who loved him most clung to each other in a house full of government officials, just doing their job. At first, I couldn't bring myself to see him, but after his mom went in, I gathered my courage. The room was icy cold as I approached him. Placing my hand on his head, I felt the lifeless chill of his body, and a strong sense washed over me. He wasn't there anymore. He was free. I told him in that moment that his body was just a shell and that he was now beyond this world. I was calm then, but the shock soon returned, and the numbness settled in. For days after, I struggled to accept that he was gone. I catch myself thinking I could just pick up the phone and call him. When the realization hit, it felt like a tidal wave of grief, and I wondered how I could go on. At times, I still feel like I have nothing to live for, though I'm learning to manage life without him. The first sign that he was still with me came during an animal medicine card reading with his father, whom I met for the first time at the funeral. His father told me that as a child, my fiancé always picked the otter card from the deck. I shuffled the 72 cards thoroughly, feeling a tingle in my fingertips as I laid them out. Of course, I picked the otter card. The second sign came during meditation. As tears streamed down my face, I felt his fingertips brush my skin, and his familiar scent filled the air, as though he were right there beside me. Since then, I've smelled his scent often, a comforting reminder of his presence. Then came the dreams and visions. One night, I woke up to hear faint beeping and cracking sounds in my room, like a machine. There was an electric charge in the air, like tiny currents running all around me. At the foot of my bed stood my fiancé. I couldn't see his features, just his silhouette, but I knew it was him. He stood perfectly still in the same pose as a photo of him that sits by my bed. But he looked as he did when he passed, filled out and older. I desperately tried to reach out to him, but each time I did, my spirit seemed to leave my body before snapping back. At one point, I fully left my body, only to feel myself being pulled toward the closet by an unseen force. Terrified, I forced myself back to my body, waking up gasping for air with my heart pounding. Some of the visions have been scary, but not all. I often see vibrant blue flashes of light, sometimes with a white center. They're unlike the white flashes I've seen since childhood. These blue flashes, which started after his passing, can be as large as 3 feet in diameter and linger for moments at a time. In my bedroom, I'll feel his energy moving rapidly around me. When I acknowledge it, the energy slows, almost as though he's excited to know I can sense him. I'll ask him to calm down, and it settles into one spot. Feels like he's trying so hard to communicate, like an eager child or puppy. The most comforting signs are the smaller ones. I feel his presence at work and in quiet moments. I believe he's learning and healing on the other side, guided by a stern teacher who watches over him. He's resting from the struggles of his life, and I feel he's happy now, waiting for me to join him one day. But some days are unbearable. I miss him so much that it feels like I could explode from the ache of not being with him. I know this life is just a small drop in the ocean of eternity, but right now, my drop feels like a rushing river with no outlet. I've considered seeing a medium to help bridge the gap, but I haven't found the right one yet. I've asked him to send me a sign when I do. Until then, I wait, holding on to the belief that he's with me, even when I can't see or feel him clearly. I know he's waiting for me, and that gives me strength. I just hope one day the connection becomes clearer. This story is based on correspondence between my friend Garrett McGee, known as Rook, and me regarding my son Brandon's experiences with what he believes to be a spirit connected to him. With everyone's permission, I've preserved the conversation as closely as possible to give full context. December 27, 2010. Me, hi Rook. Hope your Christmas was great. Hey, I have a favor to ask. My son Brandon feels like he has an entity around him, and he thinks it's a friend of his who passed away a few years ago. Could you do a view for him? I've already asked if he's okay with it, and he said yes. Do you need more info, or would you rather get your own impressions? Rook, I'd rather go off my own impressions. It makes for better validation points. Give me through the new year. I'm busy with work and family, but I'll fit it in. Me, that's great, no rush. I totally understand the holiday chaos. January 1st, 2011. Rook, here are my validation points. Red t-shirts and blue jean shorts. Sandy blonde hair, on the darker side of that color. Appears to be 7 to 9 years old, though this might refer to a learning disability or ADHD, like my youngest son, making him act younger. A name that sounds like Sean or John. If this connects, then Brandon is correct. It's his friend. His friend wants to say goodbye but feels frustrated because he can't be understood. He doesn't fully understand why he has to say goodbye. He just knows he does. Me, Rook, you're spot on. The description of the clothes, hair color, and even the name John fits. John is actually my daughter Leslie's fiancé, and their household is a full house: Brandon, JR, Leslie, John, and 2 granddaughters. They're a goofy lot, so the young behavior tracks too. Also, John is the name of Leslie's father, who passed away before she was born. He loves hanging around the grandbabies, so you may have picked up on him as well. From what I understand, there are a few presences with them. One bothering JR's girlfriend, one attached to JR from our old house, Leslie's dad, and Paul, the friend hanging around Brandon. I'll let Brandon know what you found, and we'll work on helping Paul find peace. By the way, I think the name Sean might connect to Paul's little brother, who passed a year or so before him from a brain tumor. His brother was 13 or 14 but acted younger due to the illness. Those poor parents lost both sons within 2 years. Paul was murdered, shot in the back while trying to get away from attackers. Brandon feels guilty because he'd asked Paul to go to the movies that night but canceled. Rook, is it okay to post this correspondence? I think sharing it might help others. Me, Brandon agreed. By the way, an interesting point, Brandon thought the clothing description was about him, but when he visited Paul's dad's Facebook page, he found photos of Paul's little brother wearing red t-shirts and blue jean shorts in several pictures. That must be who you picked up on. Do you think Paul and his brother are both here? Or is the brother trying to help Paul cross over? Maybe the brother came for Paul when he passed but couldn't get him to go with him? Rook. Brandon is likely the key to helping Paul cross over. Being young, he's closer to the veil and can sense his friend more easily. Paul's brother is trying to help him, but Paul seems unable to believe he's truly gone. The shadow person Brandon encountered may be an elder spirit trying to guide the process, using its limited energy to manifest. The next time Brandon feels Paul's presence, he could visit Paul's gravesite or use photos of it. That might help Paul connect to his passing and move on. You already have the answers, just follow your heart. Family connections often hold the key. January 3rd, 2011. Me. Just a follow-up. The activity in Brandon, Leslie, and JR's apartment has increased dramatically since December 31st, especially on January 2nd. I'm gathering more details to submit. It might be related to our correspondence or possibly something else going on with Shelby's, JR's girlfriend. Friend. Cool. Huh? This correspondence highlights the layers of spirit interactions in my family's life and the steps we're taking to help bring peace to those still lingering. It's amazing how connected we all are, even across the veil. Let me know what you think. Throughout my life, every house I've lived in has been haunted in some way, even the one I live in now. But the most recent and vivid experiences stand out as some of the most unsettling. The first time something significant happened was shortly after we moved from Incline Village to Sparks. I was about 7 years old, and my parents had gone out to run errands, leaving me home alone after school. I spent most of my time in my mom's room watching TV. Her room was small, divided by her queen-sized bed. When you walked in, the bed was on the right, and farther to the right were mirrored sliding closet doors, reflecting everything in the room. That day, I was already feeling uneasy. I'd been watching spooky shows like Are You Afraid of the Dark? And documentaries about mummies. Suddenly, I heard the door to my mom's room slowly creak open. Assuming it was my parents, I called out to my mom. But it wasn't her. The door opened all the way, and a tall woman walked in. She was Caucasian, with a strange towel wrapped around her head like she might have been undergoing cancer treatment. She didn't acknowledge me or make a sound. Terrified, I jumped off the bed, landed on the floor near the mirrored closet doors, and stayed there, lying flat, watching her through the reflection. The woman walked to the end of the bed and stood there, looking toward the door that led to the backyard. Then, to my horror, she sat down on the bed. I could see the bed visibly sink under her weight and hear the springs creak. She stayed there for what felt like minutes, completely still. Then, as I blinked, she stood up, walked to the backyard door, and disappeared through it. I couldn't move. I was frozen, completely unable to lift even a finger. I wanted to scream or get up, but it felt like something heavy was pressing down on me. I stayed in that exact spot for about an hour, only managing to move when my parents came home. That was the first time I saw her. The next time I saw her was years later, after we had moved to another neighborhood in Sparks, about a 15-minute walk from our old house. This is the home where I still live today. I was around 12 years old at the time, coming home from school on my scooter. That day had been terrible. I'd gotten into a fight with my best friend and was in a sour mood. As I approached my street, I reached the small hill where you can see my house. I started racing down, picking up speed, trying to shake off my bad day. But as I passed my neighbor's house, everything suddenly changed. Time slowed to a crawl. Everything around me turned black and white, as if the world had been drained of color. It was so slow that I had time to think, what is happening? When I reached the part of the yard where there was a tree almost in the center, I saw her again, the same woman in white. She was walking behind the tree in the direction I had just come from. I watched her disappear completely behind the tree, and the moment she vanished from sight, the world snapped back to normal. Full speed, full color. Thrown off balance, I crashed hard into the curb in front of my house. That was the last time I saw her, but I still think about those two encounters. Who was she? What did she want? Her presence was unsettling but not outright threatening, just deeply strange. Even now, I can't make sense of it. Last summer, my family and I moved into a new house. From the very beginning, I felt like someone was watching me. We're not the first people to live here, probably the second or third family, but I didn't think much of it at first. I'm 13 years old, and while strange little things have happened to me throughout my life, I never considered them paranormal. Looking back now, I realized they were far from normal. On my 13th birthday last September, a few months after moving in, my friends and I decided to try a Ouija board. I know it's dark and dangerous, but we didn't care at the time, we just thought it would be fun. While playing, I learned that two spirits were supposedly living in my room. At the time, it seemed cool and I didn't think much of it. We chatted with a few spirits, got bored, and eventually stopped. One of my friends said we were supposed to break the board into 7 pieces after using it, so we destroyed it and went to bed. Over the following months, strange things started happening in my room. One day after school, I was sitting at my desk doing homework. My door, which had been clicked shut and locked, suddenly swung open by itself, then slowly closed again. I froze. I thought it might be my brother playing a prank, so I called out his name, but no one answered. I checked the house and realized I was home alone. A little shaken, I went back to my homework, trying to brush it off. A few weeks later, something even stranger happened. It was around 2 or 3 a.m., and I was at my desk chatting with friends on Facebook when I heard a soft sound right next to my ear. It was like someone whispering "e." I tried to ignore it and kept typing, but then the sound moved to my other ear, louder this time. I looked up, and the sound grew even louder as if it were moving upward, toward the ceiling. It transformed from E to AAA, and as it faded, it changed again to TTT. The entire event lasted less than a minute, but I sat there stunned. To me, it sounded like someone was saying, "Eat." Trying to make sense of it, I went downstairs and had some food, though I'm not sure why I thought that was the right thing to do. About a week ago, I was home alone again while the rest of my family was out running errands. I was getting ready to visit a friend and went to my bathroom to hang up a towel before taking a shower. After leaving the lights on in the bathroom, I returned to my room to grab some clothes. While looking through my closet, I realized I could hear the shower running. Confused, I walked back to the bathroom and saw that the lights were off and the water was on. I hadn't touched the faucet. By now, I was somewhat used to the strange things happening around me, so I just shrugged it off and took my shower. Recently, I went on a vacation with my family. Before we left, I stood in my doorway and jokingly told the ghosts they were welcome to come with me if they wanted. While sitting alone in my aunt's living room a few days later, I heard a soft sigh. I looked up, but no one was around, so I went back to reading. A few seconds later, I heard faint tapping, like someone drumming their fingernails on the table in front of me. I ignored it, but then a loud, annoyed sigh came directly into my ear. Startled, I jumped up and looked around, but again, there was no one there. I'm not sure what's going on. These spirits don't seem harmful, but they're definitely making their presence known. These are the strongest paranormal experiences I've ever had, and while they might not be as dramatic as some stories I've read, they've left me wondering, should I let them stay, or should I be worried? I lived in the same house from the time I was 2 until I was 17. Over the years, I had countless experiences there that I truly believe were paranormal. At first, I thought the activity might be connected to the senior care center across the street. The center was run by a younger woman, and it wasn't unusual to see fire trucks or even coroner vans parked there due to the residents' health and passing. My theory was that some of these spirits wandered around after passing and stumbled upon my house. It seemed like a reasonable explanation at the time. Recently, however, I learned that the previous owners of the house had ties to the mob. Whether the activity was tied to them, the care center, or something else entirely, I can't say. What I do know is that my family and I experienced things that were far beyond the ordinary. The house had 3 bedrooms. Mine, my parents', and a computer room. My room was directly across from my parents', and the computer room was next to mine. From a young age, I hated the computer room. Something about it felt off, and I'd often run past it to avoid lingering in its presence. When I was about 10, I started hearing typing in the computer room late at night. My parents would already be in bed, but I'd creep out of my room to check, thinking maybe one of them had gotten up. The room would always be empty and dark. The moment I stood in the doorway, the typing would stop, only to start up again once I returned to my room. At first, I tried to rationalize it. One time, I heard my dad turning the pages of a newspaper in his room and thought maybe that was the source of the sound. But when I heard the typing while my dad was out of town, that explanation fell apart. As I grew older, I started spending more time in the computer room, like any teenager glued to the internet. One afternoon, while I was reading something online, I saw a shadow out of the corner of my eye. A tall man wearing a top hat walked past the room and disappeared into my bedroom. At that point, I'd never seen anything paranormal, and it terrified me. There was no noticeable change in temperature or any particular energy. But I know what I saw. That wasn't my only experience in the computer room. One night, while reading scary stories online, I felt a cold touch on the back of my neck. My heart raced as I spun around, but no one was there. The touch wasn't freezing or painful, but it was distinctly cooler than human skin. That was the first and only time I physically felt anything paranormal, and it was the last time I read scary stories in that room at night. The dining room held its own share of strange events. One afternoon, I was lying on the couch watching TV when the remote fell off my stomach. While it could have been gravity, it felt oddly deliberate. A few days later, I was sitting in the dining room with my best friend, telling her about the incident, when the handle for the blinds flicked hard against the blinds by itself. There was no air conditioning on, and nothing else could have caused it. My friend and I exchanged wide-eyed looks and quickly decided to leave the room. Another time, my parents and I were watching A Perfect Storm in the living room. The dining room chandelier, which had a knob for dimming and brightening, started behaving strangely. It would gradually dim, grow brighter, and then turn off entirely. It wasn't flickering but cycling through brightness levels as if someone were adjusting the knob. My dad, who's incredibly practical, finally addressed it. "Okay, whatever you are, we believe in you. Go away now," he said, clearly unnerved. The light continued its antics for another 45 seconds before stopping completely. When I was about 13, I had one of my most unsettling encounters. I woke up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. As I returned to my room, my eyes were drawn to the hallway leading to the garage. At the end of the hallway, I saw a misty white figure swaying back and forth. It wasn't fully human, but not entirely inhuman either. I could make out arms and legs, but its form was jagged. With each sway, it got closer. I rubbed my eyes, thinking I was imagining it, but it was still there. Panicked, I ran to my parents' room and slept on their floor. But the scariest experience of all happened one night while I was asleep. I've always kept my room door open and my closet door shut. Sometime in the night, I heard my mom's voice whisper my name harshly, "Ratch!" Half asleep and facing the wall, I mumbled, But then she called my name again with the same urgency, "Ratch!" This time I turned over, and my heart sank. My mom was standing in the doorway, staring at me. She didn't say a word, just looked at me with eyes that were otherworldly and full of malice. I immediately knew it wasn't her. She simply stood there for a moment before vanishing. The next morning, I asked my mom if she had come into my room during the night. She hadn't. That night left me shaken in a way no other experience ever had. To this day, I can't explain it, but I'll never forget how terrifying it was. I'm not exactly sure when I started smelling ghosts, but I do remember noticing strange scents as a kid. I'd smell things no one else could. Onions cooking, flowers blooming in the dead of winter, unfamiliar perfumes. My mom never used any due to allergies, and sometimes even apple pie in the middle of the night. Back then, I thought it was just my imagination, since that's what I was told. As I got older, my interest in the paranormal grew, and I realized I wasn't alone in experiencing these phantom scents. I discovered the term clairalience, which describes the ability to sense spirits through smell. Over the years, I've had some memorable encounters that highlight this unique gift. When we lived in the house from my Christmas ghosty story, I would often smell an earthy, campfire-like scent of an open fire, even in the summer, when lighting a fire in the Mojave Desert would be insane. Burning was prohibited anyway due to drought. When we moved to our next house, I occasionally smelled something I can only describe as burnt roses, like the scent of a snuffed-out rose-scented candle. This year, on my dad's birthday, Father's Day, and the anniversary of his passing, I smelled Old Spice, his favorite aftershave. My husband doesn't use it, and we had no visitors on those days. It was a clear and distinct reminder of him. In late winter, around February or March, I started waking up to the scent of cherry blossoms. This went on for a couple of weeks, so I walked around the neighborhood to investigate, but it was far too early in the year for anything to be blooming. Every night, I'd wake up to the scent and sniff everything. My husband, the sheets, my pajamas, even my dog, and yes, I checked my armpits too. Eventually, I'd give up and wander the house, sometimes on my hands and knees, sniffing the carpet like a bloodhound. One night, I stayed up late because I didn't have work the next day. Here's what I posted in a discussion group the next morning. Asterisk. I stayed up last night way past my bedtime. I was lying on my stomach, right hand tucked under me, left arm above my head, facing left. When I glanced at the clock, it was 2:07 a.m. We live in a gated community for older folks, so we often leave some windows open. A few minutes later, I heard two men laughing and talking outside, along with a small dog barking. I got up to investigate, my chihuahua following me. As I watched him, trying not to trip over him, I noticed little black blobs about his size darting around. My groggy brain thought, wow, shadow puppies. The blobs frolicked with my dog, running up and down the hall. When I got to the living room, the blobs were jumping on furniture and creating chaos. I yelled, how many of you are there? Suddenly, I felt a small bang against my stomach. It was like a child had slammed into me, wrapping their arms around my waist. I looked down and saw the top of a child's head, their face buried in my elbow as I hugged them. I stroked their hair and asked, who are you? A muffled voice said something like Roshan. I guessed, Roxanne. As I said the name, I opened my eyes and realized I was back in bed, in the same position. The clock read 2:16 a.m. Asterisk. Later, I researched a name connected to Roxanne and discovered the tragic story of a young girl abducted, murdered, and left under a blackberry bush. I believe the scent I'd been smelling was blackberry blossoms, a connection to her final moments. The most recent experience happened a couple of weeks ago while I was cutting my hair in the bathroom. I started smelling a foul odor that quickly became overwhelming. I turned on the exhaust fan, but it didn't help. The smell lasted for 2 to 3 hours, leaving me gagging at times. I went to the store with my son and daughter, and by the time we returned, the smell was gone. Later, while I was dyeing my hair, my husband noticed something odd. The door to the hot water heater closet was wide open, and the pilot light had gone out. This door has a slide bar lock, so it shouldn't have opened on its own. There was no wind that day, and our dogs, who would normally alert us to any intruder, had slept soundly. There were no workers around, no drains in use, and no trash to account for the smell. If this was an entity, some might say it was malevolent. But I didn't feel fear. I was more curious than anything else, trying to piece together what had happened. Whatever it was, it certainly made its presence known. This is my first ghost story entry, and I'm so excited to share it. I haven't had many experiences, but the ones I've had were, in my opinion, fascinating. This took place about 10 or 12 years ago. I'm not entirely sure. It was sometime between 1999 and 2002, back when I was still in high school. I lived with my family. My mom, dad, younger brother, and 2 baby sisters. Our house was small, just 1 story with 4 bedrooms. Well, technically 3, since my room had been converted from the garage. My dad is a carpenter. Back then, I was a typical teenager, more interested in hanging out with friends than anything else. I didn't give much thought to the paranormal and didn't particularly believe in it. The first odd occurrences were things my mom told me about. Knickknacks would fall off shelves, even ones pushed to the back. Doors would shut on their own, and the TV would turn on and off by itself. I just shrugged it off, giving my mom an, "Oh, really?" kind of response. Ghosts? I wasn't convinced. Then one night I stayed home by myself. My parents had gone to California to visit my grandparents, taking my siblings with them. I stayed back because I liked having the house to myself. As a side note, that night we got robbed. My dad, being a carpenter, had a shed full of tools in the backyard. When my family came home the next day, everything was gone. The thought of someone sneaking around outside while I was inside the house alone creeps me out even more than the events I'm about to describe. That night, I decided to sleep on the couch in the living room so I could watch TV. I never sleep without the TV on. Plus, the living room had air conditioning, unlike my converted garage room, and it was a hot Vegas night. I was just dozing off when I heard my brother's bedroom door creak open. The sound was unnerving. A long, slow creak, followed by the door gently closing as if someone was trying not to make noise. I froze for a moment, but I convinced myself it was just the air kicking on and went back to sleep. In the middle of the night, I woke up to find the TV off. I panicked, fumbling for the remote to turn it back on. I'm terrified of the dark and also claustrophobic, so complete darkness feels suffocating to me. Once the TV was back on, I managed to fall asleep again. The next morning, I woke up around 7 to the sound of voices and shuffling in the hallway. Relieved, I assumed my family was back and that my dad, who hates leaving the TV on, had turned it off. Feeling safe, I went back to sleep. When I woke up again at 11, the house was silent. Confused, I checked around and realized my family hadn't come home yet. That was when I started to believe something unusual was happening. On another night, I was sleeping in my little sister's bed. I seemed to sleep everywhere except my own room. When I sat up, frustrated about getting comfortable, as I adjusted myself, I heard a little girl gasp right in my face. It was so close that I could almost imagine her face there. Another time, I was in the same room with my brother, who was sleeping in the other bed. We were joking around before falling asleep when we both heard a strange sound. It was like an old man breathing heavily, passing over us and fading away. These strange happenings continued for about 2 weeks. Then, on the final night, something remarkable happened. That night, I was sleeping in my brother's room while he slept on a mattress on the floor. My mom and middle sister were in the bed where I'd heard the little girl's gasp, and my baby sister was in her own bed in the same room. My mom and sister were talking quietly before settling down to sleep. Suddenly, my mom heard a soft, high-pitched moaning, almost like singing, right in her ear. Thinking it was my sister, she didn't react until my sister whispered, "Mommy, did you hear that?" Terrified, my mom opened her eyes but could barely bring herself to move. When she finally turned to look, there was nothing there. I was awake in my brother's room and heard the whole thing. My mom came down the hallway, peeking into the room before walking in and shutting off our ceiling fan. "Mom, what are you doing? It's hot," I complained. "Did you hear that?" she asked. "Hear what?" "That singing." My brother and I both said, "Yeah, wasn't that you guys?" "No," she said. "Whatever it was right in my ear." That was the last night anything ever happened in that house. Not a single whisper or odd sound after that. Thinking back, I wonder if everything, the TV, the singing, the noises, was the little girl trying to get our attention. Maybe that final night when she was acknowledged, she finally moved on. Why did it happen so intensely for a couple of weeks and then stop completely? Now that I'm older, I wish I could have appreciated what was going on more fully. It was truly remarkable, and I'll never forget it. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Some years ago, my children and I visited the gravesite of a young girl who had been tragically murdered by my fraternal grandmother's uncle in 1832. I had always felt compelled to pay my respects to her, as I don't believe anyone in my family ever did. At the time, I took a small piece of slate from the site, not knowing then that it's considered disrespectful to take anything from a grave. The girl's grave now has a beautiful marble headstone, as the original was repeatedly vandalized and stolen. Some broken fragments of the original still remain around the new one. When we eventually lost our house and had to move, I would occasionally return to check on it. Each time, I'd go through the cupboards, closets, and cabinets to make sure I hadn't left anything behind. In the master bathroom, there was a small cupboard above the toilet with a shelf underneath. It was always empty. I had hung my jacket on some hooks near the bathroom window when we came back from Ohio once, and the little stone from the gravesite was in the jacket pocket. Before moving, I washed everything, checked all pockets, and thought I had placed the stone in my jewelry box. I didn't think much about it after that. A few months later, I suddenly found myself wondering where that stone had gone. I searched through everything I owned: jackets, purses, jewelry boxes, but it was nowhere to be found. I felt so upset for losing it, especially since it had such significance to me. That same morning, we learned the house had been sold, so we went back one last time to check on it. As usual, I went through my routine of checking every cabinet and cupboard. In the master bathroom, on the shelf above the toilet where nothing had ever been, there was the stone, spotless and sitting as if it had just been placed there. What struck me was that there was no dust on it or under it, despite the shelf being dusty. It was as though it had appeared out of nowhere. I was so stunned. I picked it up and waved it at my son, Brandon, exclaiming, "Do you know what this is? Do you know what this is?" His confused expression was priceless, and when I explained, he said, "What the hell? I've tried to write this off as a coincidence, but it's hard to ignore what happened. Let me tell you more." Months later, I turned the stone into a pendulum. It worked beautifully, and I even received clear answers from her. When we planned a trip to Alcatraz, I decided to take her with me for protection. The night before, I told her my plan, and she hesitantly swung the pendulum in agreement. I reassured her she would be fine and wore the stone around my neck the next morning. On our way to San Francisco, we stopped at a Jack-in-the-Box. While in the restroom, I realized the stone had slipped out of the necklace and was gone. I was devastated. I searched everywhere: the toilet, the car, under the car, and all around, but it was nowhere to be found. Back home, I retraced my steps in the driveway, the bathroom, and even places I hadn't been in a while. I reluctantly accepted that she was gone for good, though I kept asking her to come back. Then, on September 26th, I was sitting at my computer when my husband grabbed a pop from his cooler near my desk. He bent down, picked something up, and placed it on my desk, asking, "What's this thing?" It was her. There she was, back in my hands. Oh. This happened back when I was in high school. My friends, Melanie, Lauren, Freddie, Ash, my best friend, and I decided to skip one of our classes. Across the street from the school, there was a daycare that always seemed empty, making it a popular spot for lazy teens like us. That day, we crossed the street and ended up hanging out at the back of the daycare. The building was tan stucco with large tinted windows you couldn't see into, and there wasn't a single car in the parking lot. The lights were off, and it looked completely deserted. I had my back to the windows, chatting with Melanie and Lauren, the twins, when suddenly, Melanie let out a playful scream and took a few steps back, laughing nervously. "Oh my gosh, there are faces in the window," she said. Lauren followed her gaze, adding, "EW, there are." I turned around, confused. At first, I couldn't see what they were talking about, but then I bent down for a closer look. That's when I saw them. There were faces in the window, at least 3 of them, pale and ghostly, pressed right up against the glass. Their hands were splayed on the window beside their heads, as though they were trying to peer out at us. It looked like they were on their knees, or maybe lying on their stomachs, considering how low they were. What unnerved me most was their eyes. They were wide open and darting around, shifting their focus from Lauren to me. The faces themselves looked identical, white, translucent, almost glowing. Their features reminded me of the robot faces from I, Robot, with visible outlines of their mouths, eyelashes, and those piercing eyes. Yet there was no color to their eyes or skin, just a faint, glowing transparency. We all stood frozen for a moment, staring at them. Their heads stayed completely still, but their eyes moved, following our every move. The faces never blinked, never looked away. It was as though they were locked on us. Finally, a wave of unease hit me, and I laughed nervously. "Let's get out of here," I said. The others agreed, and we left, still rattled but trying to brush it off as nothing. At the time, we thought it might just be other teens ditching class and hanging out inside the daycare. But now, thinking back on it, I'm not so sure. Here's why it still freaks me out. First, the building always looked abandoned. No cars in the parking lot, no signs of activity ever. If it was locked, how could anyone have gotten inside? And even if it were other kids, why would they all have been in the exact same position, pressed against the glass like that? And why did they look so identical, glowing faintly through thick, tinted windows? The glass was so dark that it shouldn't have been possible to see through it that clearly. The more I think about it, the stranger it seems. They didn't move at all, except for their eyes, which darted around, watching us. Their stillness, their translucent appearance, and the way they glowed through the dark glass. It just doesn't add up. I'll never forget those faces, pressed against the glass, unblinking and identical. The only thing that moved was their beady little eyes, locked on us. My story takes place in a small town in Nevada called Tonopah, and I promise you this is 100% real. I wouldn't lie about something like this, but I thought you might be interested in hearing it. Tonopah is a tiny town in the middle of the desert. It was a bustling gold mining town back in the day, but after the mines were depleted, most people moved on. By the time I moved there in 2002, the population had dwindled to around 1,000. After my parents divorced, my mother, older sister, and I moved into an apartment complex in town. My mom worked as the night auditor at the Ramada Inn, taking the graveyard shift. She was deeply depressed after the divorce and started partying and using substances again. Without much adult supervision, my sister also became wild, and the two of them fought constantly, sometimes even physically. Eventually, my sister went to live with my dad in Reno, leaving just my mom and me in the apartment. My mom still worked late, often staying out until 2 a.m. or later, and sometimes she wouldn't come home until the following day. That left me home alone most nights. And that's when the strange, terrifying events began. I don't believe the apartment itself was haunted. I think the darkness we were living with, my mom's depression, the family turmoil, invited something dark into our lives. Darkness attracts darkness. The first thing I noticed was the constant feeling of being watched. It didn't matter if it was day or night. It was like there were eyes on me all the time. And it wasn't just from inside the apartment. It felt like something was watching from outside, through the windows. It became unbearable, so my mom and I switched rooms, but the feeling didn't go away. Eventually, I started sleeping on the couch by the front door, thinking that if I needed to escape quickly, at least I'd be close to the exit. One day, as I was walking from the couch to the kitchen to get something to eat, I glanced down the hallway. At the end of the hall was the bathroom, with my mom's room to the left and mine to the right. When I looked, I saw a huge, dark figure dart from my mom's room into mine. It didn't exactly run, it hovered, its feet never touching the ground. But it moved so fast that ran is the best way I can describe it. It was massive, tall enough that its head almost touched the ceiling, and completely solid. I couldn't see through it at all. I was only 9 or 10 and it terrified me. From that moment on, I couldn't sleep. The only time I could rest was when I visited my mom at work. I would literally sleep at her feet behind her desk at the Ramada. She started to worry about me, and she admitted that she felt the watching eyes too, but she had to work to keep us afloat. The only relief she could offer was letting me come to her job when I was too scared to stay home. One day, I invited a friend over so I wouldn't feel so alone. But as soon as she arrived, she said she felt creeped out, so we decided to stand on the porch and talk. While we were out there, we heard footsteps coming from behind the apartment. There were dry leaves on the ground, and we could hear them crunching underfoot as someone, or something, approached. At first, we didn't think much of it. People walked by often, and it wasn't unusual. But as the sound got closer, we realized no one was there. We stared, horrified, as we saw the leaves pressing down, forming the shape of a footstep, yet no one was visible. The footsteps came straight toward us. We screamed and bolted to her house, too scared to stay another minute. The last incident happened one night when I was trying to sleep in my bedroom. I felt a strong, overwhelming sensation that someone was watching me, standing right over me, looming. I turned my back to it, pulled the covers over my head, and tried to block it out. Then I felt pressure on the bed, as if someone had climbed in with me. My heart raced as I lay frozen in fear. Suddenly, I heard a woman's voice whisper something in my ear. It was too quick and faint to make out clearly, but it sounded like either Kayla, my name, or wake up. I was completely alone. Somehow, despite my terror, I eventually fell asleep. A few months later, we moved not out of Tonopah but to a different apartment. After we left, the dark presence seemed to leave me, too. My story is about the spirit of a cat, or perhaps more than one, that has visited me over the years. These experiences have convinced me that animal spirits exist and sometimes linger with the humans they loved. The first incident happened when I was very young. My first pet, a sweet cat I adored, would sometimes jump into bed with me, kneading and purring on my neck. She brought me so much comfort. I was in 3rd grade when she got pregnant, and my mom decided it was too much to handle. She told me we'd take her to the pound just until she had her kittens, and then we'd pick her back up. But we never did, and I was devastated. For years, I cried over her. My sisters scolded my mom for it, but the damage was done. About 5 years later, as I lay in bed one night, I felt a weight at my side and the familiar sensation of paws kneading. Then I heard purring big as life. I jolted awake but saw nothing. I immediately thought of my first cat and felt an overwhelming sadness because I knew she must have passed away. Felt like she was coming to say goodbye. Years later, when I was in college, my mother apologized for taking both my cat and, later, my dog to the pound. She explained that I'd spent so much time with my pets instead of people, and she thought taking them away might encourage me to socialize more. I understood her reasoning, but it didn't lessen the loss I felt for years. The most recent experience with a spirit cat happened about 4 years ago. I was working the graveyard shift, so I slept during the day in a loft where the sunlight made everything visible. One of my cats, a black one, had gone missing a few months prior. Living in a rural area, I suspected a coyote or owl might have gotten him. His brother still lived with me, and the two of them had always been inseparable, hunting together, bringing home rabbits and mice, and competing for my affection. When the black cat didn't come home, I wasn't immediately worried. He had stayed out before and always returned well-fed, as if another family might have taken to feeding him. But this time, he never came back. I searched for nearly a year, checking highways for dead cats, wondering if someone had taken him in, or fearing he had fallen prey to a pack of stray dogs. I even worried, in the darker corners of my mind, that something cruel like Satanists had harmed him. It made me sick to think about, so I clung to the idea that a coyote or owl had taken him. It was nature, at least, and not malice. Eventually, I had to accept that he was gone. Then one day, while lying in bed in the loft, I felt the unmistakable sensation of a cat jumping onto the bed. It moved close, but this time it stayed at my side rather than near my neck. I could see clearly that no cat was there, but the weight and warmth felt so real. I wondered if it was my missing cat, letting me know he was okay. Or maybe it was an unrelated spirit cat, drawn to the affection I gave to his brother, finding comfort and warmth with me for a moment. After his brother's disappearance, my other cat changed. He no longer went out at night unless it was to quickly use the bathroom, and even then he stayed close to the house. He'd carefully scan the area before venturing outside, visibly nervous. I think he may have witnessed his brother's death or had a close call himself. He became much more cautious and rarely went out after dark. During the winter, he refused to go outside at all unless it was daytime, and I was there to let him back in immediately. This cat is still a fierce hunter. He recently brought a live cottontail rabbit into the house, sending my husband on a wild chase to catch and release it. But his nighttime adventures are rare now, and he's far more selective about what prey he deems worth his attention. From these experiences, I've come to firmly believe in animal spirits. I think they stay around after death because they're bonded to their humans or perhaps enjoying their newfound freedom to cause mischief in the spirit world. Cats especially seem to take pleasure in stirring things up, even from beyond the grave. Eventually, though, they seem to move on, often coming back to say goodbye first. Maybe they find another happy life, or maybe we'll meet them again someday. About 27 years ago, I had to leave town for a week on a work trip. Before I left, I called my grandmother, who lived in the same town as me. During the call, she told me to let her know when I got back so she could have me over for pot roast. We hadn't visited in a while, and I promised I'd call her when I returned. When I got back from my trip, it was late after hours of flying. Exhausted, I slept in the next day, which was a Saturday. The rest of the weekend was spent catching up, cleaning, organizing, and preparing for the busy week ahead. It happened to be Labor Day weekend, so I also had Monday off. On top of everything, I was taking a class at the local university and trying to catch up on the material I'd missed while traveling. Between work, the class, and trying to get my life back in order, I hadn't called my grandmother yet to let her know I was home. On Monday morning, my day off, I invited a classmate over to study with me. While we were reviewing notes, I got up to grab a glass of water. Passing the phone mounted on the wall, I suddenly remembered that I still hadn't called my grandmother. The thought crossed my mind, but then I decided not to call her that day. I rationalized that I was tired and needed to rest after the study session. I'll call her tomorrow, I thought. It was a selfish decision, but at the time I felt like I needed the break. As soon as that thought entered my mind, I was shaken to my core by an incredibly loud voice in my head. It spoke over my own thoughts, booming, "Can you live with that decision?" The voice wasn't male or female, but it was powerful, startling, and unmistakable. Completely stopped me in my tracks. I stood there, stunned, giving serious thought to the question. After a moment, I answered internally, "Yes, I can live with that." Then I shook it off and went back to my studies. About 5 hours later, my brother called. He told me something was wrong with Grandma, and she was in the emergency room. I rushed to the hospital, but about 20 minutes after I arrived, we were told that they couldn't save her. My grandmother had passed away. It turned out that she had been cooking beans that morning and started to feel tired. She decided to lie down while the beans simmered. My grandmother was a deeply religious woman and always knelt by her bed to say her prayers before lying down. She was found by a nephew, still in the kneeling position, with her head and upper body collapsed onto the bed. The coroner said her heart had simply stopped. She hadn't been sick, and she was only in her 50s, so her sudden death shocked everyone. For years, I carried tremendous guilt for not calling her when the voice had warned me. I kept replaying that moment in my mind, wondering if I could have done something to change what happened. The voice gave me a choice and I chose wrong, or at least that's how I felt. Looking back, I've come to understand that I made the best decision I could with the information I had at the time. I'm only human, and hindsight has a way of making things harder than they need to be. That doesn't erase the pain or regret, but it helps me accept that some things are simply out of our control. I've wondered many times about the source of that voice. It hasn't happened to me since, but I've questioned if it could have been my guardian angel or some other force trying desperately to get through to me. Perhaps it had to yell because I'm so thick-headed that subtlety wouldn't have worked. I'll likely never know for sure, but the experience has stayed with me ever since. Recently, I found out that my grandmother likely had a rare genetic heart condition that can cause sudden death. Knowing this has given me some peace, but it doesn't diminish the memory of that powerful, otherworldly warning. One that I'll never forget. Growing up in the Las Vegas area, I had a few interesting paranormal experiences. This one, from when I was 18 in the early 80s, is more funny than spooky, but it's mysterious enough that I thought it would be worth sharing. Back then, downtown Las Vegas meant the Fremont Street area. One evening, a friend and I spent our time wandering around, eating 50-cent shrimp cocktails, and even sneaking in a bit of underage gambling at the Horseshoe. It was easier to get away with back then, though I wouldn't recommend trying it today. After we'd had our fill of fun, for some inexplicable reason we decided to stop by a cemetery. It was 1 a.m. and we thought it might be creepy in a fun way, kids doing what kids do. The cemetery, somewhere off Main Street, was completely deserted and pitch dark. I pulled into an empty parking lot, turned off the engine, and we got out of the car. For about 20 seconds, we stood there by the car in total silence. There was no traffic on the nearby road, no other people, no noise at all. It was unnervingly quiet, and the atmosphere quickly went from fun spooky to just plain eerie. Without saying much, we both got the feeling that we needed to leave. Immediately, we jumped back in the car, but when I tried to start it, the engine wouldn't turn over. I kept trying, but it just wouldn't start, and I realized I had probably flooded it. Panic started to set in as we sat there in the dark, stuck in a cemetery with nothing and no one around. Back then, there wasn't much nearby. No gas stations or businesses to walk to. It was just us, the cemetery, and the unnerving silence. And then suddenly there was a car next to us. A cop car. It appeared out of nowhere. I hadn't heard it pull up, hadn't seen headlights. Nothing. But there it was, parked right beside us. This wasn't your typical Las Vegas police cruiser, though. The car and the uniformed officer stepping out of it looked like they belonged in a small, rural town out in the middle of nowhere, maybe with tumbleweeds rolling by. The cop, he looked more like an old-school sheriff, walked up to my window and asked, "Need a ride?" We eagerly said yes, desperate to get out of there. He motioned for us to get into the back of his car, and we did without hesitation. He drove us to my friend's house on 8th Street. On the way, everything seemed normal, but as we approached the house and he turned onto the street, the atmosphere shifted. The sheriff turned around to us in the back seat with a devilish smile and said, "Watch this. Your neighbors are going to love this." Then, with no warning, he flipped on his flashing lights and briefly hit the siren. At 2 a.m., my friend and I were mortified, but he was laughing, clearly amused by our reaction and the spectacle he'd just created. When we reached the driveway, he kept his flashing lights on while we fumbled with the door handles, struggling to get out. Eventually, he let us out, still chuckling, and we ran inside. As we looked back, he was sitting in the driveway, lights still flashing. The next day, I went back to the cemetery to retrieve my car. To my amazement, it started right up on the first try, as if nothing had ever been wrong with it. To this day, I have no idea why the car wouldn't start that night or how the sheriff appeared so suddenly. His uniform and car looked decades out of date, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something about him was off. Was he a real person, or was he sent to save us from whatever might have been waiting in that cemetery? I'll never know, but I'm still grateful for the rescue, strange as it was. Recently, I helped my friend, let's call her Marie, sage her house. She had brought her sister, who struggles with drug addiction, to stay with her for a while. Unfortunately, her sister didn't come alone. She brought something dark and unsettling with her. You might remember me mentioning a black glob in a previous story? Well, it decided to reappear in my life. I'm starting to wonder if these things are more common than I once thought. To give you some context about Marie, I've always considered her a medium, though she doesn't call herself one. She frequently has nights where she can't sleep because spirits won't stop talking to her. Sometimes I'll catch her reacting to things I can't see. Once, while we were smoking hookah in her backyard, she suddenly turned her head and snapped, "Can you leave me alone already?" Apparently, a spirit was sitting there, rambling about his pocket watch and wanting it repaired. When we Googled the brand he mentioned, we found out it had been discontinued in the 1600s. That's just the kind of thing that happens around Marie, which is why I trust her instincts when it comes to the supernatural. Marie's house, built in the 1980s, isn't particularly old or new. As soon as I walked into her guest bedroom, though, I felt chills run up my spine and an overwhelming sense of weakness. That's when Marie told me the room had been her sister's for a few days before she went to rehab. Whatever was attached to her sister had apparently lingered in the closet after she left. It was a rainy day, which only added to the eerie vibe. Marie decided we needed candles for the cleansing, so we went out and got 2 black candles and a white one. She mentioned that black candles could act as portals, which made me a little uneasy. We couldn't find the Himalayan salt she wanted, so we used sea salt instead, creating thick lines along open windows, the doors, and the glass door leading to the backyard. She also surrounded the candles with salt for protection. When we got back, a friend of Marie's showed up to help us. We lit the sage and began cleansing the house, starting with the least affected rooms. We carefully saged every corner, leaving the guest bedroom and attic for last. Whatever was in the house seemed to sense what we were doing because, while we were in Marie's bedroom, the faucet in her bathroom suddenly turned on by itself. All three of us were in the room, so there was no way it was one of us. We just turned it off and kept going. After finishing the main areas, we turned our attention to the attic. The house is one story, and they had recently been installing a security system up there. Apparently, whatever was in the attic hadn't appreciated being disturbed. It had been stomping around angrily ever since. As we saged the attic, the air felt tense, but after a while, the energy began to shift. I felt the room grow lighter, calmer, as if something had been expelled. Finally, we moved to the guest bedroom. Marie's friend stood in the doorway, while I stood near the dresser where one of the black candles was burning. Marie was beside me, closer to the closet. We saged every corner of the room, and when Marie brought the sage to the upper left side of the closet, things took a turn. Out of nowhere, we were hit by a sudden burst of air. Both of us screamed as it felt like something invisible barreled toward us. Marie's friend, still in the doorway, said she actually saw it. A dark shape flying toward us before retreating back into the closet corner. Marie held the sage there, and I could feel the energy in the room shifting again, as though something was being drawn out and sucked away. And then, just like that, it was gone. The oppressive feeling in the room lifted, and the space felt clean and safe again. Took a while to drive whatever was out, but we succeeded. Since then, nothing dark has returned to Marie's house, and I have to say, it was a surreal but empowering experience. Even to this day, I consider this the strangest experience of my life. I don't remember exactly how old I was, but I was pretty young. While I don't recall many of the details firsthand, my mother described me as being constantly scared, always looking around as if something unseen was there, and feeling a dark presence surrounding me. It all began when my mother made me start reading the Bible. Like most kids, I found it boring. But what stood out was that every time I sat down to read, I would get overwhelmingly sleepy. It didn't matter how alert I felt beforehand. After just a few words, I'd struggle to keep my eyes open. My mother said it was the devil trying to stop me from reading. At the time, I thought that was a strange thing to say and didn't really believe her. But then, strange things started happening. I don't remember sleepwalking or what I did while in that state, but my family's accounts of those events terrified me. I vividly recall the unease I felt as they shared what they had seen me do. At the time, we lived in a small apartment with only 2 bedrooms. One room was shared by all 7 members of my family, while the second was occupied by my cousin, who was staying with us. My mother told me I would get out of bed in the middle of the night, stand in the corner of the room, and watch everyone sleep. Sometimes I'd stand directly over them. My older brother said he saw me wandering around the apartment, looking out the windows, opening the bedroom door as if to check for someone on the other side, or standing against the walls and talking to someone. I have no memory of any of this, but what I do remember are the vivid, disturbing dreams I had during that time. They were dreams about my family's doppelgangers. In each dream, I'd be with a specific family member when their doppelganger would suddenly appear and come after me. The dreams always ended abruptly, just as they attacked. One dream about my younger brother still haunts me. It was particularly terrifying, and I've never shared the details with anyone. Not even my family. I didn't want to frighten them further or make things worse. As time went on, the sleepwalking became more extreme. I began physically harming myself and exhibiting inappropriate behaviors. My mother said I had stopped speaking altogether and appeared increasingly tormented, as if something invisible was relentlessly tormenting me. I was descending into what felt like madness. My mother could no longer bear to see me in such a state, so my parents turned to the church for help. They arranged for me to be blessed. I remember the day of the blessing vividly. We went to the church and I was brought before a large crowd. The priest recited prayers and sprinkled holy water over me. It was a solemn moment, but I didn't fully understand what was happening at the time. What I do know is that after the ceremony, everything stopped. The sleepwalking, the dreams, the bizarre and frightening behavior. All of it vanished. My older sister described it as though the light had finally touched me, lifting a dark cloud that had been suffocating me. Life returned to normal and I felt like myself again. Even now, I can't fully make sense of what happened. My family's testimonies about my behavior are chilling, but the experience itself feels like a fragmented memory, something I can never fully piece together. Was it something spiritual, psychological, or both? I don't think I'll ever truly know. What I do know is that it was a terrifying chapter in my life, and I'm grateful it's behind me. I don't know quite where to begin, so I'll just start at the beginning. For years, Bonnie Springs, a ranch near Las Vegas, was known not just for its charm but for its reputation as a notoriously haunted place. Until it closed earlier this year, it hosted a Halloween event called Bonnie Screams, which a friend and I attended for 2 consecutive years. Both times, I experienced something that still leaves me shaken. I've always thought I might have a connection to the paranormal, maybe even be somewhat of a medium, but what happened at Bonnie Springs went beyond simply seeing spirits. The most chilling moments occurred at what was said to be the most haunted location on the property, the old playhouse. The first year we attended, a magician was performing a show there. As soon as I stepped inside, I noticed a small girl standing on the stage. She looked about 7 years old, with pigtails, and she quickly disappeared backstage. At the time, I thought she was part of the show and didn't give it much thought. During the performance, there were papers taped to the walls of the playhouse. One sheet, and only one, was fluttering as though caught in an invisible breeze. I couldn't stop staring at it. When the magician introduced a trick involving the ghost of a little girl, who supposedly haunted the building, it suddenly made sense. He explained that the girl had been murdered and then used a bell tied to a rope to try to communicate with her spirit. When he asked the audience where she might be, I blurted out, "She's on the stage." Almost immediately, the bell rang, as if confirming what I said. I went pale. While the show carried on as normal, I couldn't stop thinking about her for the rest of the night. The experience disturbed me deeply. The second year we attended, things escalated. Again, as soon as I entered the playhouse, I saw her, standing on the stage just as before. This time, I told the magician about my experience the previous year and mentioned that she was still there, on stage. I think he thought I was joking, but when he performed his ghost trick again, he turned it into a bit of a game, involving me in the process. It didn't go well. First, nothing happened. Then, out of curiosity, the magician asked if the girl was near me. No response. He hesitated but stepped behind the woman holding the rope attached to the bell and asked, "Are you on the stage?" The bell rang and didn't stop. For a full minute, the bell chimed continuously, growing more unsettling with every second. Then the banging started. Loud, angry banging, coming from every wall in the room. Panic spread through the audience as the sound reverberated around us. My blood ran cold. After what felt like forever, the banging ceased as suddenly as it started. The magician, visibly shaken, hurried to finish the act. I got the distinct feeling he wanted me out of there as fast as possible. That night, for the first time in my life, I believe a spirit truly reached out to me. When I went to sleep, I didn't have a typical dream. Instead, I was transported to the Old West, Bonnie Springs as it might have looked in its heyday. But I wasn't myself. I was her, the murdered little girl. In the dream, I was being violently dragged by a man who stayed hidden in the shadows. I screamed, begged, and fought, but he was relentless, yanking me along the dirt road past the old schoolhouse on the property. That's when I saw the axe. The horror of what came next is hard to put into words. He struck her small body repeatedly, with sickening ferocity. She screamed, and then she didn't. He kept going long after she was silent, and it felt like an eternity before he finally started digging a shallow grave. I saw it all, where she died, where she was buried, every horrible detail. I woke up drenched in sweat, completely shaken. I couldn't stop thinking about her or what she had shown me. Earlier this year, Bonnie Springs was torn down to make room for new housing developments. It breaks my heart to think that her remains, if they were ever there, are likely lost forever. I can't go back to help her. I can't help her find the peace she deserves. A part of me hopes that she only wanted someone, anyone, to know her story. Maybe, By showing me what happened, she finally found the closure she needed to move on. I hope she's at peace now, somewhere far from the place where she suffered. But another part of me wonders if she's still there, unable to leave, now trapped in the shadows of these new homes. That thought fills me with sadness. To the little girl at Bonnie Springs Ranch, I'm so sorry I couldn't help you. I'm sorry for the pain you endured. I hope, somehow, you found the peace you seek. I worked on the 3700 block of Las Vegas Boulevard for about 4.5 years. I wasn't employed by the casino itself but by a third-party vendor, and we faced the famous fountains. Vegas is a city that's constantly tearing down and rebuilding, but just because something is gone doesn't mean it stays gone. After about a month of working there, I started noticing something strange. I'd occasionally catch a glimpse of the back of a woman's head. She had blonde hair and looked to be about 5 feet 5 inches. But she was never really there. I'd see her for just a moment, usually in the women's section of the store, and then she'd vanish. I told my coworkers, but no one took me seriously. They just thought I was the weird guy who liked to talk about ghosts. The store I worked in was large, with about 1,500 square feet of shopping space and an additional 1,100 square feet of stockrooms. The stockrooms were divided into 4 sections, each separated by doors. The farthest stockroom, which we called the shoe room, was particularly creepy. Everyone avoided spending time there if they could help it. Personally, I didn't mind it. It was quiet and a good spot to hide out from management. I also worked frequent overnight shifts, resetting the floor and showcasing new pieces. It was peaceful seeing the city lit up but mostly empty. Most of those shifts were uneventful. Nothing strange ever happened. Until one night it did. It was around 2:30 a.m., and only the visual manager and I were working. I was in the shoe room, about 7 feet up on a ladder grabbing some shelving. I was singing to myself when I heard someone call my name. Johan! Johan! I called back, "What?" but got no reply. Thinking the manager was nearby, I climbed down and walked out to the sales floor, calling out again. To my surprise, I saw her walking from the opposite side of the store. She asked me what I wanted. That's when it clicked. She thought I had been calling her name, and I thought she'd been calling mine. Neither of us had said anything. A heavy, uneasy feeling settled over the sales floor as we both realized what had just happened. Neither of us mentioned it again that night. A few months later, the location downsized, and part of the store, including the women's section and the shoe room, was turned into a new restaurant. I felt relieved knowing that the most active areas wouldn't be part of our new space. Even now, I can't explain what I experienced, but I know it wasn't just my imagination. My brother passed away in July 2020. About a month after he died, I had a dream where he appeared to me. He said, "Bruce, come see where I'm at. It's a great place," and started pulling at my feet. I replied, "Skip, I still have things to do on Earth. I'll see you again, but I need to stay here for now." He smirked the way he always did and then disappeared as I woke up. 2 weeks later, it happened again. I saw my brother pulling on my ankles, saying, "This way." I woke up startled. I tried putting salt in front of my door, but it didn't help. Since then, something has continued pulling at my feet, sometimes even when I'm awake. The third time, it wasn't my brother anymore. It was a shadowy figure tugging at my feet until I kicked it off and woke up. The fourth time, my sister-in-law, who passed away 6 months after my brother, appeared. I was sleeping when I heard her voice, and she punched me in the chest while I lay there. My winter coat, which I was wearing for warmth, exploded like a strong blast of air had hit it. A little backstory. After my brother died, she told me on the phone that she wanted to punch me for not visiting him before he passed. I had driven all night from Vegas to Colorado Springs to see him, but couldn't bring myself to go into the hospital. It was too painful. I'd already lost another brother before him. I stayed the night in a hotel and made the round trip back to Vegas. I think she got her revenge for that. To this day, something still pulls at my ankles, often at 3 or 4 a.m. recently. I had to fight it off again while I was awake. I'm 70 years old and afraid to sleep most nights because I never know when it's coming back. I live in a quiet retirement neighborhood where many homes have had previous owners who passed away, so maybe that has something to do with it. At first, it felt like my real brother was visiting me, but now I'm not so sure. Others have told me it could be something pretending to be him. Whatever it is, I still feel its presence. I'm not sure what to do, and most nights I stay awake until I'm too tired to fight sleep anymore. From the moment we moved into that house, I knew my parents wouldn't believe us. My best friend, Sabrina, and I often found ourselves huddled together, shaking, unsure of what might happen next. The house seemed to mock us with its strange occurrences. It started the first night I slept there. I was used to sleeping with my door open in our old house, where I always felt safe. But that night, as I lay in bed staring at the unfamiliar walls, I kept seeing shadows pass by my open door. Every time I sat up to look, the hallway was empty. Eventually, I turned over and tried to sleep, but the overwhelming feeling that someone was standing over me never went away. I never slept with my door open again. Sabrina and I used to try ghost hunting for fun, inspired by TV shows, though we rarely experienced anything. The first night she stayed over at the new house, we decided to stay up late and do each other's makeup. I sat in front of the small mirror in my closet, noticed it was dirty, and wiped it clean. The next morning, we opened the mirror and jumped back in shock. A green handprint, covered in dirt, was sliding down the glass. Trying to shake it off, Sabrina went to the bathroom. When she returned, I accused her of closing the bathroom door to scare me. Her face went pale as she insisted, "I didn't." The door was heavy, with a thick rug underneath that made it hard to close even with force. It wasn't something that could move on its own. Throughout that year, strange things kept happening. Pennies appeared in the oddest places, inside the freezer, unopened food packages, perched on picture frames, and even in locked rooms. Then there were the technical glitches. All our computers stopped working within a month. One TV broke, and my phone refused to save audio or videos, claiming it was full when it wasn't. Sabrina's iPod randomly changed the date and time. One night, while ghost hunting with another friend, the recording timer on my phone began to skip numbers. We asked if someone was there and told them to skip a number again. It obeyed. Every time we asked, it skipped the number. The room became ice cold, and I felt the sensation of someone touching my arm. The scariest EVP session Sabrina and I ever had happened that first summer. At first, we were hyper and not taking it seriously, but as we calmed down, we began asking real questions. When I said, "Show us that you're here," a loud crash erupted beside my bed. Terrified, we hid under the blankets, too scared to check. The next morning, we found the remote control on the floor. It had been far back on top of the entertainment center, nowhere near the edge. Another morning, we woke to find the front door wide open. My parents were still asleep, and our first thought was that someone had broken in. We checked the house, finding no one, and realized the door had to have been opened from the inside, but it was still locked. Sabrina said she had heard strange noises near the door earlier that night. One night, past 3 a.m., I was woken by the sound of my doorknob jiggling violently. I tried to stay calm and fell back asleep, only to dream of a demon girl killing and possessing people in the house. I woke up with a visible bruise on my waist. Other strange things happened. A locked door in the morning that had been open the night before, a smiley face I'd drawn on a paper mysteriously gaining a nose within seconds of me leaving the room, and water in the shower turning on and off by itself. Sabrina and I captured many ghost voices during EVP sessions, as well as unexplained sounds. If you'd like to hear some, I can share examples. And if you're curious about the pennies, I have plenty of stories about those too. This was our experience in that haunted house. A year filled with fear, mystery, and memories I'll never forget. My experiences with the paranormal began during my childhood in England. The earliest memory I have is a recurring dream where someone led me to the river's edge in our garden, showing me bodies floating downstream. The people wore clothing from an older time period, and the dream happened so often that it became etched in my mind. Years later, I connected it to the plague that swept through Europe. Even though I haven't had that dream since we moved from that house, I can still vividly remember every detail. Another unsettling incident happened when my sister and I were heading to our playroom. I was following her when the door suddenly slammed shut in my face, locking her inside. We both screamed and frantically tried to open it, but it felt like someone was holding it shut from the inside. Eventually, we managed to get it open and ran straight to our room, terrified. When I was 6, we moved to Las Vegas, and for a while life was calm. But then the voices started. Early in the mornings, I would wake from a deep sleep to the sound of voices screaming my name. It wasn't just one voice. It was the voices of everyone in the house, calling out to me in a taunting way. I also heard the sound of paper rustling and being thrown around. When I'd check on everyone, I'd find them all still fast asleep. I'd ask the voices to stop, but they wouldn't. Terrified, I'd hide under my covers until the noise finally ceased. Although these occurrences weren't frequent, they always left me shaken. At night, I often felt like something negative was watching me from the shadows of my room. When I was 10, everything changed with the arrival of a little dog. She came into my life unexpectedly. I found her hiding under my mother's car. No one in the neighborhood claimed her, so she stayed. From the moment I met her, I felt like we were meant to be together. She quickly became my protector. If I felt uncomfortable around someone, she'd sense it and nip at them to make them back off. Otherwise, she was gentle and calm. She followed me everywhere and always waited for me when I left the house. But one day she got out. I was at a friend's house across the street when I heard my brother screaming my name. To my horror, I saw her being attacked by 2 large dogs. That day, she was taken from me. The night after her death, I left my bedroom door open and heard the faint jingle of her collar in the hallway. It was the same time she used to patrol the house to ensure I was safe. I sat up in bed and, to my amazement, saw her ghostly figure walk past my doorway. I ran out, calling her name, but she was gone. The next morning, I felt her presence again. Sitting on the couch, I felt the weight of something jumping up beside me. A breeze brushed across my face, carrying the familiar scent of her breath. It was comforting to know that, even in death, she was still watching over me. My dad got a new dog shortly after to help ease the loss. The day we brought him home, he ran straight into my room, jumped onto my bed, and started barking furiously at nothing. He looked terrified, like he'd been electrocuted. Another time, he bolted into the backyard but then slowly backed inside, staring intently at something invisible. He moved backward into the hallway, completely silent and clearly scared. When I called his name, he snapped out of it. I told my dad, "She's visiting us again." Over the years, I've noticed I have certain abilities that seem unusual. I can sense negativity in people, even if I don't know them. I get feelings when something bad is about to happen. Once, I even had a vision of a man sitting in the backseat of my car, wanting to harm my boyfriend and me. Shortly after, at a gas station, a man approached us asking for a ride. We said no. I don't share my experiences with many people. Even some of my immediate family doesn't know. I often wonder if I might be psychic, but I don't know what to do about it. Are these strange coincidences? Or is there something more? Sometimes I feel like I'm crazy, but I just wish I had someone to talk to who could help me understand. Mika was my childhood cat, a beautiful but mischievous Siamese Himalayan mix. My mom had named her Muckaloo after the Himalayan peak, but at 2 years old, I found that a mouthful, so I started calling her Mika. In her younger years, Mika was well behaved, but as she aged, she became a bit of a troublemaker. She didn't claw furniture or cause major damage, but she loved knocking things over just to be a nuisance. Her biggest quirk, though, was her insatiable appetite. She would eat her fill, wander off for a few minutes, then come back and meow endlessly for more food. At first, my mom kept her canned cat food stacked on the kitchen counter. Mika quickly figured out how to push the cans to the edge with her head, sending them crashing to the floor. We'd hear the clatter and know she was at it again, probably hoping the cans would burst open so she could eat. After one too many messes, my mom moved the cans to a cupboard, but Mika didn't let that stop her. We came home one day to find the cupboard door open and cans scattered everywhere. She was determined. Mika's curiosity extended to my canopy bed. One morning, While I was fast asleep, she jumped onto my bookshelf and then onto the canopy. Much to her surprise, the fabric wasn't a sturdy surface, and she came crashing down on top of me in a tangle of lavender, heart-patterned fabric. I woke up screaming, and Mika bolted. She did this a few more times over the years, probably just to mess with me. Mika passed away at 15. Her health had been declining for a while, so we knew it was coming, but that didn't make it any easier. Losing her was devastating, not just for me but also for our other cat, Tabitha, who didn't understand where her lifelong playmate had gone. A few weeks after Mika's death, I was playing with Tabitha using a shoelace, Mika's favorite toy. Mika had never liked sharing it and would swat at Tabitha if she tried to play with it. So, I was shocked when Tabitha suddenly ducked, as if avoiding a swat, hissed, and ran off. "What are you doing, crazy girl?" I said, confused. There was nothing there, but whatever she saw had spooked her. About a week later, I was sitting in the living room watching TV when I heard the distinct sound of cans sliding on the kitchen counter. I went to investigate but found Tabitha sound asleep in my mom's room. Then I heard a loud crash. I ran back to the kitchen and found all the cans on the floor. They had been pushed all the way to the backsplash earlier, so it didn't make sense for them to have fallen. I laughed, realizing Mika was still causing mischief. A few days later, while washing produce at the kitchen counter, I heard the cans slide again. I turned and said, half-jokingly, "Mika, that's enough." The cans didn't fall that day, but when I checked later, they had moved a few inches forward. After that, the incidents became less frequent. It was as if scolding her worked, just like when she was alive. One night, I was feeling particularly low. After finishing homework, I fell asleep quickly, only to wake up at 5:25 a.m. I felt fabric covering my face, something I never allowed because of my claustrophobia. Pulling it off, I realized it was the canopy fabric from my bed. It had come down just like when Mika used to jump on it. I turned on the light and recognized it as a clear sign from her. I cried, overwhelmed with a mix of sadness and comfort. She was still looking out for me. As I sat there, reflecting, I felt my bed shift slightly, as though a small weight had landed and then sprung off. It was a gentle dip, just like when Mika used to jump off the bed. I froze, realizing it was her way of saying goodbye. After that night, I never experienced her presence again. Mika had been my protector and companion for most of my life. Losing her was my first real experience with grief, and I think she returned because we both needed closure. Her playful messages, especially the canopy fabric, were her way of telling me to keep my chin up and that she was still there for me, even in spirit. I firmly believe that the bonds we create with our pets transcend death. Mika's visits reminded me how much love and connection we can share with animals, and how deeply they impact our lives. It's a beautiful thing, one I'll never take for granted. I've never actually seen a ghost or had definitive proof of something paranormal, but throughout my life, I've experienced strange things that have left me unsettled. This is a collection of those moments, though the more recent events seem to connect them all in a way that's hard for me to ignore. Apologies if this feels a bit unorganized. This is just how it's all played out in my mind. For as long as I can remember, I've been fascinated by the paranormal. Once I had access to the internet, I'd spend hours researching ghosts, demons, and the unexplained. Because of this, people around me have always dismissed any strange experiences I've had, saying it's just my overactive imagination or paranoia. But there are things I've experienced that feel too real to ignore. I've always felt watched, even when I'm alone. It's this constant, subtle awareness that something or someone might be nearby, even when there's no logical reason for it. I don't remember a time when I truly felt alone. It's always been like a shadow lingering just out of sight. To cope, I've developed the habit of keeping myself engaged in conversations or distractions so I don't spiral into fear. One of the earliest unexplained things I can recall involves stereos. They would randomly turn on, blaring at full volume no matter where I was. Once, in second grade, I was in reading circle when the classroom stereo suddenly turned on full blast. The entire class, including the teacher, was startled, but no one could explain why it happened. This type of event has followed me for years. Every house I've lived in has had certain spots or rooms that my dog fixates on. She'll sit and stare at these spots for long stretches or even bark at them for no apparent reason. This has been a consistent pattern as far back as I can remember. There are also rooms I instinctively avoid at night. Some spaces give me chills and an overwhelming sense that something bad will happen if I linger too long. I refuse to turn my back to them, as if keeping them in my peripheral vision might somehow protect me. Since moving into a new house a few months ago, I've started hearing knocks on the other side of my closet door. It happens mostly at night, but occasionally during the day. For weeks, no one else heard it, which made me feel like I was losing my mind. But then one night, the knocking was so loud that my mom heard it from her room. She shrugged it off, but for me it was terrifying. I can't explain it, and it continues to happen. 2 nights ago, something happened that left me shaken in a way I've never experienced before. It was around 1:30 a.m., and I was chatting with a friend on MSN. He was telling me about an experience he had with a Ouija board and a girl he supposedly contacted. As the conversation turned spooky, the TV in my room, stuck on a DVD menu screen for days because I was too lazy to reset it, suddenly turned off with a loud pop. As the light faded from the screen, the room filled with an odd warmth, almost like it had reverted into the television. At the same time, the clock started flashing, my chat client disconnected, and my fingers began to sting. I was frozen, unable to move for about 30 seconds. When I finally regained control, I bolted out of the room and spent the rest of the night sitting outside my aunt's bedroom, too terrified to go back in. Usually, daylight brings me a sense of relief, but not this time. The fear has lingered. Now, whenever I enter that room, I feel weak and panicky, like the space itself is charged with something negative. I even feel uneasy talking about what happened while inside the house, as if whatever it is can hear me and knows I'm discussing it. I can't help but wonder if my fascination with the paranormal has somehow invited these experiences into my life. Could my constant research and curiosity have attracted something to me? Is it possible for spirits or entities to know when I'm talking about them? Or maybe it's all in my head. Paranoia fueled by years of obsession with the supernatural. But if it's just paranoia, how do I explain the stereo turning on, the knocking, my dog's behavior, or the TV shutting off at that exact moment? I don't know what to believe. Part of me feels like I need to stop thinking about it, to stop fueling whatever this is. But another part of me wants to keep searching for answers, hoping to understand whether these experiences are random coincidences, tricks of my mind, or something more. If anyone else has felt this way or experienced similar things, I'd love to know how you've dealt with it. I'm not sure if I'm looking for validation or a way to move forward, but right now I just want to stop feeling so unsettled all the time. I've always been fascinated by the paranormal and have had a few experiences throughout my life. While I'm always excited when something unusual happens, I'm also quick to analyze it or try to find a logical explanation. The events I'm about to share took place 2 years ago over the course of a year. My friend Tom had accepted a job that required him to be away from home for a year. Instead of closing his house and boarding his 2 beloved basset hounds, he asked if I'd be willing to move in and care for his home and dogs. I agreed and brought along my own 2 furry companions, settling into his home. Tom's house had a distinctive layout. Upon entering, there was a staircase to the left leading to the 3 bedrooms and bathrooms upstairs. Down the hall to the right was the master bedroom, while to the left were the 2 other bedrooms and a shared bathroom. From the upstairs hallway, there was a balcony overlooking the living room below. I never felt completely comfortable upstairs and avoided going there whenever I could. Often, when I was downstairs sitting on the sofa, I'd feel like someone was watching me. The feeling was strongest near the upstairs balcony, as if someone were standing there, observing me. It wasn't just the sensation of being watched. It felt judgmental, like I was under scrutiny. Sometimes it was so intense that I'd whip around, fully expecting to see someone. But, of course, no one was ever there. Every evening, Tom's dog Trixie would head upstairs to sleep on his bed. Without fail, as soon as she reached his room, she would stop at the doorway and bark, as if something had startled her. What really unnerved me was the rustling sound that often followed her barking, like someone had been caught in the act of doing something they shouldn't. She would watch intently for a moment before eventually walking into the room and settling down to sleep. Although unsettling, I brushed it off, convincing myself it was just my imagination. The most startling incident happened on a beautiful spring afternoon. I had fallen asleep on the couch when I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps. Multiple sets of them, running up and down the stairs. The sound repeated over and over, the footsteps bounding loudly. Assuming the dogs were roughhousing, I sat up to scold them. But to my surprise, the stairs were empty. I was confused, but the realization hit me when I remembered I had locked all the dogs in the garden to enjoy the weather. Whoever or whatever was responsible for the noise clearly wasn't my dogs. Another strange occurrence involved the shower curtain in the upstairs bathroom. It was a sequined, decorative curtain that refused to stay on the rod. At least once a week, I'd find it on the bathroom floor in a shimmering heap. The curtain was never torn or damaged, but it simply wouldn't stay put. No matter how securely I rehung it, I'd always find it on the floor again. I couldn't think of a reasonable explanation, but the absurdity of it made me laugh. As the months went on, I began to suspect that the strange happenings were the behavior of mischievous children. One particular experience seemed to confirm this theory. I was in the kitchen, pulling dinner out of the oven, when I felt a sharp tug on my shirt. It wasn't a pull outward but downward, like it was being yanked by someone much shorter than me. Before I could react, I heard a light, playful giggle behind me. The sound sent chills down my spine, and I couldn't help but shout, "That's not nice!" Similar small events continued to happen throughout the rest of the year. I made my peace with the idea that I might be caring for more than just basset hounds, but I still felt uneasy about the presence near the upstairs balcony. Even now, I can't help but feel watched when I think about it. When I was 4 years old, my family, consisting of my mom, dad, and my almost 3-year-old sister, moved into a beautiful 2-story house in the suburbs of Las Vegas, Nevada. For my parents, it must have been a dream come true. We had previously lived in a small house in a rough part of town, and before that, in a cockroach-infested apartment. This was a fresh start. Excited to show off their new home, my parents invited friends over shortly after moving in. One of those friends was a priest my father had known for years. As my mother tells it, the priest asked to speak with my father privately in the backyard. Apparently, he urged my dad to leave the house, insisting something evil resided there. But my father, a skeptical man with no patience for spiritual matters, laughed it off. 14 years later, I wish he had listened. At first, everything seemed normal to us kids, but my mom later revealed that strange things had started happening almost immediately. My parents heard what sounded like large wings flapping in their bedroom at night, but whenever they turned on the light, the room was empty. Thinking something might be getting in through the fireplace, they stuffed it with beach towels, but the sound persisted. Their electric workout equipment began turning on by itself, even after being unplugged. The TV in their room occasionally turned on randomly as well, though less frequently. One night, my mom woke to see the glowing outline of a figure at the foot of their bed. She was paralyzed with fear. When she glanced at my father, she saw that he was awake too, staring at the same thing. After a few moments, my dad jumped out of bed and turned on the light, but the figure was gone. Our parents never shared these stories with us when we were young. They didn't want to feed our already overactive imaginations. Even so, my sister and I instinctively avoided our parents' room. It always felt cold and unwelcoming. I was terrified of the mirror in their bathroom, certain I'd see the reflection of a wild-looking woman emerging from the closet. Over time, I began singing religious songs or saying prayers aloud whenever I had to go into the room. Strangely, the air always seemed to get warmer when I did. It wasn't long before my sister and I had our own experiences. When she was about 4 and I was 6, she was playing alone in her bedroom when all our toy musical instruments started playing by themselves in the nearby playroom. She called out, asking if I was in there. I yelled back from the living room that I was downstairs watching SpongeBob. She quickly ran to join me, though she didn't tell me what had happened until years later. For me, the first strange experience came when I was about 8. I was sitting close to the TV in the playroom watching a ghost hunting show. During a transition, The screen went black, and I saw the reflection of the room behind me. In the reflection, I noticed a tall, shadowy figure standing in the open doorway. Assuming it was my dad home from work, I turned around, but no one was there. Panicked, I turned off the TV and bolted downstairs to join the rest of my family. Footsteps in the attic and on the stairs became a nightly occurrence. My sister and I would lie awake, listening. Worse, whenever I went downstairs, I'd imagine a wild-haired woman with sharp teeth grabbing me and throwing me down the stairs. It was a terrifying thought I couldn't shake. Things escalated after I had my first Holy Communion in 3rd grade. One night, I woke up at exactly midnight and noticed the red light on my smoke detector, which was normally green. As I sat up to investigate, I saw a woman in my doorway. She wore a light blue, high-collared nightgown, and her white hair was piled on top of her head. Her face alternated between a skull and a blank, featureless visage. She swayed back and forth, leaving trails of light as she moved. Terrified, I called out, "Mommy!" She shook her head. "Sissy!" Again she shook her head. Desperate, I asked, "Grammy!" She grinned at me. I screamed and hid under my blankets, pinching myself to make sure I was awake. The next morning, I told my mom, who comforted me by saying it was probably my Grammy visiting. But my sister later told me that when Grammy visited her, she looked loving and warm. Whatever had visited me wasn't Grammy. Another odd occurrence happened when I was napping. My sister walked past my room and saw a semi-transparent, glowing white cat curled up at the foot of my bed. As soon as I woke up and asked what she was staring at, the cat vanished. In 5th grade, I had a dream that terrified me. I dreamt I woke up to find long, black hands reaching out from under my bed and pulling off my sheets. I ran to the doorway, only to see my look-alike doll perched on the headboard, smiling eerily. When I woke up for real, my lights were on, my sheets were off, and I immediately called for my parents. That night, my mom threw the doll away. Over the years, my sister and I continued experiencing strange events. Disembodied voices, floating heads, shadowy figures darting from room to room. The house was cleansed multiple times, but the activity always returned. My sister saw a wild-haired woman in her room after surgery, a figure that eerily resembled the one I used to imagine on the stairs. When my parents divorced during my 9th grade year, the activity lessened for a while, but it never stopped completely. Cabinets would slam shut on their own. Footsteps echoed through the house, and our dogs refused to enter certain rooms. By my junior year, we finally moved out. A close friend, who claims to be psychic, once told me that a dark spirit was attached to my family. I laughed it off, but when she warned that it could harm my pregnant mother, I felt uneasy. 2 weeks later, my mom miscarried, and the doctors couldn't explain why. My mom and others have told me I have a light that draws spirits. Many women in our family have had spiritual connections. I don't know if that explains what happened, but those years in that house will always stay with me. I work for a popular grocery chain in the western United States. Our company is part of a larger corporation that owns several grocery chains across the country. In Las Vegas, the grocery industry is highly competitive, and over the years, some chains have had to close underperforming stores and sell them to others with better potential to serve the area's demographics. A few years ago, my company purchased several of these stores. One of the stores we acquired has a dark and infamous history. In 1999, a man entered the store early one morning and went on a random shooting spree, killing 4 employees and critically wounding another. Among the victims were a middle-aged bakery/service deli clerk and a produce clerk, both killed in the same area. I work in the same department, so the tragedy struck a chord with me when I heard the story. This store isn't my home store, but a few weeks ago, I spent a week there to help out the bakery/service deli manager, who was short-staffed. I had heard from other employees that the store was believed to be haunted, and I was curious to see if I'd experience anything myself. I didn't have to wait long. The first couple of days, I had the distinct feeling of being watched, but I shrugged it off as residual negativity from the store's history. By the 4th morning, I decided to address it. While prepping for the day, I said aloud, "Okay, If you're here, show me. I won't be scared. Just do something out of the ordinary. Almost immediately, things got strange. Our ovens have a locking mechanism to secure the racks inside, and I usually leave one lock in place to make swapping racks faster. But that day, every time I went to load something, I found both locks engaged, forcing me to stop and unlock them before I could proceed. It had never happened before, and it slowed me down significantly. I even left shoe prints inside the oven from having to step in to fix the racks repeatedly. Frustration aside, it was odd. The next day, I started my shift searching for the small knife we use to score dough. It's a crucial tool and is always kept in the same area for easy access. But no matter how hard I searched, it was nowhere to be found. Annoyed, I grabbed a larger, more cumbersome knife and grumbled a colorful string of expletives as I finished scoring the first batch. Afterward, I took a quick break and went to the restroom. When I returned, the missing knife was sitting right next to my water bottle. It hadn't been there before, and I would have noticed it during my frantic search. I couldn't explain it. The most active day was the following morning, my second-to-last shift at the store. While prepping the first racks, I heard an older woman's voice say, "Hello." It sounded just like a customer politely trying to get my attention. But the store wasn't open yet, and the only other women in the building were a clerk with a deep voice and a floor cleaner running a noisy buffer. I replied, "Hi," and even thanked her, but I couldn't shake the oddness of the moment. Later that day, I went upstairs to retrieve a scan gun for markdowns. The guns are kept in a locked room that requires a combination code to access. As I climbed the stairs, I heard banging and rustling coming from the room. When I turned the corner, I saw the door closing, as if someone had just been inside. I ran to catch it, but it shut just before I got there. I pounded on the door for 5 minutes, thinking someone might still be inside, but no one answered. The bookkeeper and checkers hadn't arrived yet, so the room should have been empty. When I finally got the combination later in the day and went back upstairs, the door was ajar. It's supposed to stay closed at all times. I passed another employee on my way up. She had just come from the break room, which is nearby. I asked her the next day if she'd noticed the door being open, and she said it was closed when she was there. I knew she hadn't been inside because the room has motion-sensitive lights that turn off after 10 minutes of inactivity, and the room was dark when I entered. While I tried my best to debunk each event, I couldn't find logical explanations for most of them. Maybe some of the incidents were coincidences, but I can't help but feel that something, or someone, was trying to get my attention. When I was 12 or 13, I had an experience that still haunts me. At the time, I was living in a house with mold in the walls and roof. The mold was so bad it sent my mother to the hospital, and with my father always at work, I was left home alone most of the time. With that freedom, I made a decision I now regret. My dad is deeply religious and despises anything he considers evil, like Ouija boards and pentagrams. Just to spite him, I borrowed a Ouija board from my neighbor and decided to try it out. I had no idea what I was getting myself into. I set up the board at the dining table. The dining room and kitchen were connected, and behind a thick 4-inch plaster wall with small openings for plants was the living room. That wall would soon play a big part in what happened. After setting everything up, I grabbed a glass of water. I get dehydrated easily, and placed it safely beside me against a wall, away from the board. I placed my hands on the planchette and started, saying, "Hello." At first, nothing happened, but after a couple of minutes, the planchette began to move, slowly spelling out hello back to me. I was startled but kept my composure. "What is your name?" I asked. "Sophia," it spelled out. I asked more questions. "Why are you here? Why are you trapped? What do you want?" But I didn't get answers to any of them. Thinking it was broken, I asked one final question. "Are you a demon?" The planchette slid to yes. As soon as it did, my glass of water flew off the table and smashed against the thick plaster wall. The sudden crash startled me so much I jumped out of my chair. Then I started to feel dizzy, like the room was spinning. Fearing I might pass out, I stumbled outside to get some air. The moment I stepped out, I blacked out. When I woke up, there were faces hovering over me, one of them being my father's. He was asking me what had happened, but I couldn't remember. I yelled at him to stop asking because it was all a blur. When we went back into the house, the Ouija board was gone. I assumed my father had destroyed it, but that wasn't the end. When I went to my room, I found it completely destroyed. It looked like a tornado had ripped through it. My books were scattered everywhere, some with their pages ripped out. My stuffed animals were torn apart, their stuffing and beads strewn across the floor and hallway. Whatever I had contacted, I had clearly angered it. I ignored the mess, collapsed onto my bed, and hugged my pillow, crying. I was ashamed of myself for not listening to my father's warnings. I berated myself in my head, calling myself stupid and worse. Rocking back and forth on the edge of the bed, I couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of regret. We moved out of that house nearly a year later, but the trouble didn't end. Our new house seemed peaceful at first, but things started happening again. My mother and I often argue about my messy room, which might sound normal. But here's the strange part. Every day, I clean my room and show her, and then I leave for school. When I come back, it's completely trashed again. At first, I thought my mom was messing with me, but then things got darker. Messages began appearing, scratched into my bookcase and walls. Messages like, "You're dead, I'm here," and the one that stood out the most, "I'll protect you." Now, almost a year into living in this new house, the activity continues. My mom and I still argue, and the arguments often end with something breaking. Not because we threw anything, but because objects seem to shatter on their own. I feel like I'm stuck between two forces. There's clearly something angry. Maybe it's the same entity I upset with the Ouija board, or maybe it's something else entirely. But there's also something that seems to be protecting me, and whatever it is, it's not human. I don't know what to do. Is this an angry spirit I've brought with me? Or is it a demon that resents me for crossing into its territory? Whatever it is, it doesn't like me. And while I'm grateful for the protective presence, it's terrifying to think about what's really going on. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. When I was a teenager, my mom, younger brother, and I moved in with my 2 aunts and grandparents. My mom had been diagnosed with recurring cancer about 8 to 9 months after my dad left us, and we couldn't afford to pay rent on our own. We shared the master bedroom, which was huge, with a small hallway at one end leading to a bathroom, flanked by closets. My bed was on one side of the hallway, while my mom and brother shared a bed on the other side. On our second night there, my 11-year-old brother mentioned that he woke up around 2 a.m. to use the bathroom but froze when he saw a white, glowing figure sitting or kneeling between our beds. He said it slowly rose and walked toward the bathroom. My mom and I dismissed it as a dream or his imagination. A few years later, when I was about 15 or 16, I had my own unsettling experience. Late one night, around 1 a.m., I was lying in bed, unable to sleep, when I heard soft crying coming from between the beds. It sounded like a woman, and I assumed it was my mom. She was undergoing chemotherapy and often cried at night, thinking we didn't notice. I stayed quiet, listening, but something about the crying didn't sound like her. Finally, I said, "Mommy?" Her response, clear and calm, was, "Yeah, baby." The moment I spoke, the crying stopped abruptly. No sobs, no sniffles, just silence. I asked if she was okay, and she replied that she thought I had been crying and didn't want to disturb me. I told her it wasn't me, and she suggested it might have been our dog having a bad dream. Glancing across the room, I saw our white dog fast asleep in the corner. Feeling spooked, I hid under my covers. The next morning, I brought it up again. My mom admitted she didn't believe it was the dog, but didn't want to scare me. She told me that shortly before the crying started, she had felt something rub her leg in a soothing way. She thought it might have been her grandmother's spirit, mourning her youngest granddaughter's pain. Years later, my mom's health took a turn for the worse, and she was hospitalized. I stayed by her side most nights, but one night when I wasn't there, my aunt called, saying my mom was asking for me and my brothers to come immediately. When I arrived, the nurse was changing her sheets, and my mom was too weak to get up, so I helped hold her in a sitting position. Despite her frailty, she tried to be her usual silly self. But then, she suddenly looked behind my aunt and screamed, "Lucy, be careful with that shadow behind you." None of us saw anything, so we assumed it was the medication making her hallucinate. I didn't think much of it until my cousin Carla told me she had seen the shadow too. My mom had told her, "Keep singing. The shadow doesn't like it when we pray or sing." As Carla sang gospel songs, she noticed a dark shadow in the corner of the room, slowly moving toward my mom. Just as it got close, two beams of white light appeared on either side of my mom's bed, and the shadow retreated. Carla's sister experienced something similar. By then, my mom was in a coma. While holding my mom's hand and praying, my cousin felt the urge to look up. She saw a dark shadow on the opposite side of the room, moving toward my mom. Startled, she got closer to my mom, and once again, two white beams appeared, forcing the shadow to disappear. None of us had shared these experiences with each other until I mentioned my mom's earlier comment about the shadow. The final experience happened on the night my mom passed away. She had been sent home on hospice care. That morning, my beloved dog also passed away, leaving me heartbroken. I slept most of the day and, around 9 p.m., had a vivid dream. In it, my mom, healthy and happy, walked up to me, smiled and said, "I love you, mi Nina, but it's time for me to go." She kissed me and I woke up. Feeling uneasy, I went to her room, kissed her forehead, and told her I loved her before heading downstairs to eat. Moments later, my aunt ran down to tell us my mom had stopped breathing. I truly believe she came to say goodbye before letting go. We've had a lot of small, strange experiences over the years. They might not seem like much on their own, but together, they tell a story of the unexplained in our lives. It started with something that looks exactly like my cat Mystique. The strange part is it only ever looks like Mystique, never like my other cat, Madden. Yet sometimes it acts like Madden. The first time I noticed something odd was in the bathroom. I saw a paw under the door and thought Mystique wanted to come in. After washing my hands, I went to my room and found her curled up in her usual spot, right where my brother said she'd been the whole time. Then I remembered the paw under the door didn't have orange toes, and Mystique's toes are all orange. That wasn't the only time. One night, I saw Mystique run out of my room and asked my brother Darian to grab her. He looked over and said, "She's right here." I laughed nervously and said, "It's back." We felt it jump on the bed countless times, just like a cat would, settling by our feet or hopping off, but when we look, there's nothing there. One night, Darian noticed a cat on my desk and asked, "Are your cats allowed up there?" Mystique was lying beside him, and Madden was chewing on my hair. Another time, we were reading ghost stories on my bed, and I felt Madden tugging my hair again. When I asked Darian to move him, he told me Madden was in his shirt and Mystique was under the laptop. Even scratching at my door often turns up nothing. Still, it doesn't scare me. I think it might be the spirit of Annabelle, a cat we love dearly, keeping an eye on us. Not all experiences are as comforting. Darian was watching a movie one night when he glanced toward the second living room. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw a tall, dark figure walking through. At first, he thought it might be our dad, but when he checked, Dad was sitting on the couch watching the movie too. Then there's Darian's room. It always feels like someone's watching you in there. One day, the chain for his ceiling fan snapped for no reason. We think it might have something to do with Amber, a spirit we contacted through a Ouija board. She doesn't like me, but she seems to have a crush on Darian. I avoid his room whenever I can because I often feel a strange, electric chill on my left arm or leg. Darian says he feels things touch him at night. Another spirit we contacted through the board was Max. He told us he was 15, though we never figured out why he was there. One day during a session, Darian joked about how dumb the whole thing was and got up to leave. Suddenly, a heavy book flew across the room, hitting him. It had been sitting on top of my stereo, surrounded by other items that weren't touched. When we asked Max if he did it, he admitted it. To this day, Darian doesn't think it's funny, but I can't help but laugh about it sometimes. When I lived in Rathdrum, Idaho, my friends and I used to explore this old church. One day, we were snacking on cheese and crackers near a shed by the church. My friend Booba opened a window, and out of nowhere, a disembodied thumb appeared. Just a thumb. It waved at us and told us to leave. We ran faster than we ever had. I sometimes wonder if we imagined it, but how could we all see the same thing? I don't mess with Ouija boards anymore. They scare me too much. But the memories of these experiences stick with me. They've become part of our lives, and even though they're unsettling, I can't help but look back on them and wonder what it all means. This all started when we moved into our new house. From the very beginning, strange things started happening. I live here with my mom, stepdad, younger brother Darian, who's 13, and my youngest brother Devin, who's 11. The first thing we noticed was how different Devin's room felt compared to the rest of the house. It was always colder, darker, and carried this unsettling energy that I couldn't quite explain. But because it gets so hot in Vegas, we'd often end up in there anyway, drawn by the coolness of the room. Every time I went into Devin's room, a wave of unease would wash over me. It was hard to breathe, and the air felt heavy. I've always been a little sensitive to things like this, and I've had my share of strange encounters in the past. But this felt worse, much worse. Sometimes just sitting in there with my brothers to watch TV, I'd get sharp, random pains in my arm, leg, head, or stomach. Eventually, I started avoiding the room and spent more time in my own, which always felt warm, cozy, and safe. Things really took a turn when my friend Gina came over after school one day. She's also sensitive to energies, and I wanted to see if she felt the same as I did in Devin's room. As soon as she walked in, she froze. She said she felt uneasy, like she needed to leave, but at the same time we both wanted answers. We wanted to know what or who was in there. That's when we made the first mistake. We decided to make our own Ouija board. Sitting on Devin's bed, Gina, Darian, and I tried to make contact. Devin was staying at his mom's house that night, so it was just the three of us. We asked for a name. The board moved, spelling out letters too quickly for us to follow. Then, it stopped on Ray. We kept asking questions. Told us it was a demon. Almost immediately, I felt a sharp, stabbing pain in my head. Gina told me to grab my crystal and go to my room. I did, and the pain subsided, but the fear lingered. Our second mistake came later. We thought we were brave enough to try a seance. This time, we chose the garage. We made a circle of salt and held hands, deciding to call out to the entity, Ray. The temperature dropped drastically. It became freezing cold, and my cat, Mystique, who is also my familiar, went absolutely insane. She scratched and meowed frantically at the door, desperate to get inside. What happened next still haunts me. I saw him, a tall man, with slicked back hair that was long at the ends, and a bristled jawline. I couldn't see his eyes, and I didn't try to look directly at his face. I was too terrified. I focused on looking past him, keeping my eyes on Darian instead. The figure turned toward me. I still didn't dare meet its face. And then, out of nowhere, a searing pain tore through my stomach. It felt like my insides were being twisted and turned. I thought I was going to die. The pain was that unbearable. I started crying, doubled over in agony. Gina shouted for us to focus on picturing him back in the room, locked away. We did as she said, imagining him retreating. Then we broke the circle and ran inside. Even now, just walking past that room gives me chills. Sometimes, when I go in, I feel the same cold presence, like a shadow of what happened that night. All I know is, I never want to go through that experience again. My name is Teresa, and I'm 15 years old now, but this all began when I was 13. It was about 6 months after we moved into a new house. It wasn't much, an old mobile home with its fair share of problems, but it was ours. I had just moved into my own room, which felt like a big deal at the time. But almost immediately, strange things started happening. My closet was fairly large, with sliding doors made of glass, rolling mirrors. At the time, I didn't know that mirrors are sometimes thought to be gateways for the dead. To make my small room feel bigger, I hung mirrors everywhere, not realizing the potential consequences. In my room, I also had an old Ouija board that I'd picked up secondhand. A few weeks earlier, I tried using it with my mom, but it had been a half-hearted attempt that didn't seem to work. What was strange, though, was that after we put it away, the box started glowing green. I thought maybe it was an open portal, but I didn't know for sure. Once I was settled into my room, I started noticing odd things. The mirrors on my closet doors would shake for no reason. Whenever it happened, I'd tell it to stop or I'd acknowledge, "I know you're here," and it would stop. Drafts would move through my room even when the windows were closed. But the scariest part was the sound of something punching the walls. Sometimes once, sometimes several times in a row. Every night when I went to bed, my bed would start shaking. I tried everything to recreate the movement myself, but nothing I did could explain it. It felt like someone physically standing there, grabbing the bed, and shaking it. The most disturbing moments were when objects were thrown at me. Once, my headphones were hurled at me, hitting me hard enough to leave bruises. Other times, my keyboard and random items from my desk would fly across the room. I still have scars from cuts I received during those encounters. My mom had her own experiences too. She once told me that while she was talking to my little sister in the kitchen, something kicked the refrigerator so hard it jumped and moved a few inches. Another time, while I was away on vacation, she called me at the hotel, terrified. She said she could hear stomping, banging, and things being flung around the house. I wasn't surprised. I simply told her, "It's Caleb and Dan Ice," naming the entities I had been dealing with. Caleb was the one attached to me, and Dan Ice was tied to a friend of mine. Over time, I made the mistake of befriending Caleb. I thought he was just another spirit, even after learning he was a demon. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal and pretended it was normal. After we moved out of the mobile home, I learned the truth. Caleb is an incubus and a high-ranking demon. My little brother once described seeing him as a massive black dog, but I've seen his true form. He's about 7 feet tall, with long black hair that reaches his ankles. He has no eyes, and I don't know how old he is, but I know he's a fallen angel who was with Lucifer during the fall. I've met other demons too. Dan Ice, for instance, is a Nikael, an Egyptian cat demon. Then there's Nikki, a familiar demon who also appears as a cat. Despite everything, I must admit something that might sound strange. I've fallen in love with Caleb. I know what he is, but I believe deep down that he's a good person. Many people I've spoken to have had similar experiences and have even claimed to have met Caleb. My parents, however, believe he and the others are just figments of my imagination. But I know what I've experienced, and it's very real to me. This story marks what I believe to be my very first ghostly encounter. It happened when I was in 3rd grade, about 2 weeks after the school year began, and it's something I'll never forget. The day itself started off feeling strange. I remember this heavy, suffocating feeling, like being stuck in a crowd, even though our house was open and airy, and my school was brand new. My mind felt oddly blank too, like a veil had been lifted, though nothing unusual had happened the night before. After school, things got even stranger. I started catching glimpses of things, like a dog I could only see through my right eye, and shadowy figures moving in my peripheral vision. Every time I turned to look directly, there was nothing there. It seemed like I was seeing another world, but only from the corner of my eye. That evening, my little brother Spencer and I were having a drawing contest in the dining room while our parents watched TV in the living room. As we drew, we heard the unmistakable sound of scurrying paws and claws on the floor, coming from the kitchen. We both looked up, but there was nothing there. Thinking it might have been our cat Shadow, we called out to our parents for help. That's when we learned Shadow was sitting on our dad's lap, and our dog Toya was outside in the backyard. Just as we were trying to make sense of the noise, one of the dining room chairs slid a few feet across the floor. Spencer and I panicked and ran to our parents, yelling that something was in the kitchen. Our mom searched the area but found nothing, though I kept catching glimpses of something dark in the corners of the room. It didn't look like normal shadows. It was denser, moving as though it had a mind of its own. Eventually, we gave up searching and joined our parents in the living room, trying to shake off the unease. Later that night, Shadow was curled up on my lap while I watched cartoons. I started hearing soft purring and meowing nearby, but it wasn't coming from Shadow. Slowly, the sounds changed into hissing and yowling, coming from behind me. It was loud and eerie, but no one else seemed to hear it, not even my parents sitting nearby. When it was time for bed, Spencer and I joked about the strange chair-moving incident, saying maybe one of our drawings had come to life. But when I told him about the hissing and yowling, he looked scared and didn't want to turn off the lights. Eventually, our dad made us go to bed and turned off the light himself. Lying in the dark, I couldn't sleep. It wasn't fear keeping me awake, but this strange, cramped feeling, like I needed to make room for someone. I scooted closer to the wall, trying to ignore it. Hours passed, and I finally started dozing off. Then I heard it, purring. Shadow was under Spencer's bed, but the purring sounded louder and more unsettling than usual. Suddenly, the purring turned into a deep, snarling sound, like Shadow was being choked and force-fed at the same time. My heart raced as I jolted up to check on her. Shadow's green eyes glared at me from across the room, her fangs bared as she hissed and snarled. She hadn't moved from the foot of Spencer's bed, but her eyes locked onto me, unblinking. Then, without warning, she leapt at my bed, claws outstretched. I instinctively grabbed my pillow and used it as a shield while she scratched and tore at it, trying to get to me. All I could do was scream, too scared to fight back. This was my beloved pet, my friend. I couldn't bring myself to hurt her. I heard footsteps rushing to the door, and my dad burst in, turning on the lights. The moment the light flooded the room, everything stopped. Shadow collapsed at the foot of my bed, limp and lifeless. Spencer sat up, staring in horror as I clutched my pillow, trembling. Shadow had never acted this way before, not even close. What struck me the most was what I saw just before the chaos ended. As the lights came on, I saw a dark mist seeping out of Shadow's fur. It wasn't my imagination. It hovered over her for a moment before dissolving into the light. To this day, I'm convinced Shadow was possessed. Even now, I carry a small scar on my arm from her claws that night. That moment will always stay with me as proof that sometimes, we truly don't know what forces we're sharing our space with. My name is Teresa and I'm 15 years old now, but this all began when I was 13. It was about 6 months after we moved into a new house. It wasn't much, an old mobile home with its fair share of problems, but it was ours. I had just moved into my own room, which felt like a big deal at the time. But almost immediately, strange things started happening. My closet was fairly large, with sliding doors made of glass, rolling mirrors. At the time, I didn't know that mirrors are sometimes thought to be gateways for the dead. To make my small room feel bigger, I hung mirrors everywhere, not realizing the potential consequences. In my room, I also had an old Ouija board that I'd picked up secondhand. A few weeks earlier, I tried using it with my mom, but it had been a half-hearted attempt that didn't seem to work. What was strange, though, was that after we put it away, the box started glowing green. I thought maybe it was an open portal, but I didn't know for sure. Once I was settled into my room, I started noticing odd things. The mirrors on my closet doors would shake for no reason. Whenever it happened, I'd tell it to stop or I'd acknowledge, "I know you're here," and it would stop. Drafts would move through my room even when the windows were closed. But the scariest part was the sound of something punching the walls. Sometimes once, sometimes several times in a row. Every night when I went to bed, my bed would start shaking. I tried everything to recreate the movement myself, but nothing I did could explain it. It felt like someone physically standing there, grabbing the bed, and shaking it. The most disturbing moments were when objects were thrown at me. Once, my headphones were hurled at me, hitting me hard enough to leave bruises. Other times, my keyboard and random items from my desk would fly across the room. I still have scars from cuts I received during those encounters. My mom had her own experiences too. She once told me that while she was talking to my little sister in the kitchen, something kicked the refrigerator so hard it jumped and moved a few inches. Another time, while I was away on vacation, she called me at the hotel, terrified. She said she could hear stomping, banging, and things being flung around the house. I wasn't surprised. I simply told her, It's Kalev and Dan Ice. Naming the entities I had been dealing with. Kalev was the one attached to me, and Dan Ice was tied to a friend of mine. Over time, I made the mistake of befriending Kalev. I thought he was just another spirit, even after learning he was a demon. I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal and pretended it was normal. After we moved out of the mobile home, I learned the truth. Kalev is an incubus and a high-ranking demon. My little brother once described seeing him as a massive black dog, but I've seen his true form. He's about 7 feet tall, with long black hair that reaches his ankles. He has no eyes, and I don't know how old he is, but I know he's a fallen angel who was with Lucifer during the fall. I've met other demons too. Dan Ice, for instance, is a Nikael, an Egyptian cat demon. Then there's Nikki, a familiar demon who also appears as a cat. Despite everything, I must admit something that might sound strange. I've fallen in love with Kalev. I know what he is, but I believe deep down that he's a good person. Many people I've spoken to have had similar experiences and have even claimed to have met Kalev. My parents, however, believe he and the others are just figments of my imagination. But I know what I've experienced, and it's very real to me. In October of 2002, I moved into my very own townhouse. I was 19, a single mother of a 1-year-old, and excited to start fresh. But soon after moving in, my son seemed terrified to sleep in his room. He'd cry, point, and act as though he could see something I couldn't. Hoping to figure out what was bothering him, I decided to clean out his room and unpack the remaining boxes. That's when I found it. A box tucked under his bed. Inside were obituaries. There was one for my grandmother on my father's side, another for my cousin from my dad's family, and the last one for a classmate of mine who had taken her own life in high school. The sight of these obituaries under my son's bed immediately made me uneasy. I moved the box to my own room. Strangely, after that, my son never seemed afraid to go into his room again. But removing the obituaries didn't end the strange occurrences in the house. Over the 5 years I lived there, both my next-door neighbor and I experienced several unsettling encounters. I'll start with the story of my classmate. Back in high school, she was one of the popular girls. We weren't close friends, but we had a class together and exchanged greetings a few times. About 2 years after high school, she died. The story was that she'd gone home, grabbed a chair and a rope, and hanged herself. But there were rumors that it had been an accident, that she'd slipped. I attended her funeral, and soon after, I began having dreams about her. In every dream, she was cold, unmoving, and her hazel eyes glowed unnaturally. They had always been her most striking feature, and now they were haunting. Years later, when I moved into the townhouse, my ex, who occasionally stayed with me, told me she'd seen a little girl in the house. I hadn't told her anything about my classmate at the time, so the coincidence chilled me. My classmate had been petite, around 5 feet 2 inches and barely 105 pounds, which fit my ex's description perfectly. Even stranger, my next-door neighbor once looked up at my bedroom window and saw a figure standing there. She said its head was tilted to the side as if it were hanging. I hadn't told her about my classmate's death either. The house itself seemed to have its own energy. One evening, my neighbor and I were standing at the bottom of my stairs. At the top of the stairs were my bathroom and bedrooms. Suddenly, a strong, icy breeze came rushing down from the top. We froze. I tried to brush it off, saying, "Oh, it's just the air." But a minute later, the AC kicked on. We exchanged a terrified glance and ran out of the house. Another time, a friend came over late at night to watch TV. She tried to use my landline phone and told me it wasn't working. There was no dial tone, just dead air. I didn't believe her, so I picked up the phone myself. She was right. The phone was dead. We tried everything to get it to work, but nothing helped. Then, out of nowhere, the phone started ringing by itself. There was no one on the line, just that same dead air. We panicked, ran out of the house, and drove to a nearby gas station. I used a payphone to call my own number. Nothing. I tried again, and again there was no response. I decided to call my mom, who has always been religious and is known to have a clairvoyant sense about her. I told her something was wrong with the phone and asked her to meet me at my house. When we got back, I picked up the phone again. Still nothing. My mom arrived a few minutes later, and I handed her the phone, exasperated. "See, it's not working," I said. But when she pressed the button, there it was, a clear dial tone. She looked at me like I was crazy. My friend and I tried to laugh it off, calming down after my mom left. But as soon as she was gone, I picked up the phone again. Dead air. Oh. I have to admit, I've always been fascinated by the supernatural. Watching my favorite show, Taps, aka Ghost Hunters, kept my curiosity alive, even though I'd never had an experience of my own. Truthfully, I never fully believed in ghosts. I thought, if I can't see or hear them, how can they be real? I was convinced that the ghosts on TV were just clever camera tricks to make a good show. But everything changed yesterday. My girlfriend suggested that we visit a cemetery to see her brother's grave. He had passed away at the age of 4 in a tragic accident. Another child around his age had held him underwater too long, causing him to drown. I decided to bring along a Sony handheld mini cassette recorder and an 8.1 megapixel digital camera, thinking it would be the perfect chance to test this whole EVP, electronic voice phenomenon thing. When we arrived, I pressed record on the cassette recorder and went about the visit. My girlfriend and I were talking near her brother's tombstone while my 5-year-old son played in the grass behind us. At one point, he tripped where the grass met the pavement, and I ran to check on him. "Are you okay?" I asked. "Yes," he replied. I told him to be more careful, brushed the grass off his knees, and let him continue playing while I returned to my girlfriend. On the way back to her brother's grave, I noticed a tombstone with the name Olga carved into it. Feeling a little silly but curious, I asked, "Is there anyone here with me who would like to have their voice heard? Can you tell me your name?" I heard nothing and walked away. Later that day, when we got home, I sat down in complete silence with a pair of big headphones and listened to the recording. What I heard sent chills through me and brought tears to my eyes. The first voice came when my son fell. As I asked him, "Are you okay?" I heard a faint, young voice whisper, "Don't crash." It was so clear, and it happened just before my son started talking. Then, when I told him to be more careful, I heard the same faint voice respond, "Okay." Again just before my son spoke. I had to pause and step away for a moment, overwhelmed by what I just heard. After a few deep breaths, I sat back down to finish listening. When I reached the part where I stopped at Olga's tombstone and asked if anyone was there, I heard a faint response, "My name is Olga," or at least that's what it sounded like to me. My girlfriend, however, mentioned seeing a tombstone nearby with the name Rhonda on it. So, it's hard to say if it was Olga or Rhonda that I heard. Either way, it was undeniably a voice. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wasn't scared exactly, but I felt uneasy, like I had lost a sense of privacy, like someone was watching me. A part of me wanted to go back to the cemetery right away to try and capture more, but another part of me wasn't ready for what I might find. This experience changed everything for me. I now know spirits are real, and they can interact with the living if you approach it the right way. It's going to take me some time to fully process what happened, but one thing is for sure, I'll never forget those voices. Oh. Sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying the story, let me know in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more. Oh. Last year, I visited my best friend in Vegas. She lives in a stunning mansion in Henderson, Nevada, just 10 minutes from the Strip. It sounded like the perfect getaway until my first night there. I woke up in the middle of the night with the unnerving feeling of being watched. But it wasn't just a feeling. Though I was still half asleep, I saw a dark, shadowy figure of a man leaning over me. My logical brain brushed it off as a weird dream, and I forced myself back to sleep. The next morning, I told my friend about it, and she admitted something she'd been holding back. Her house was haunted. I've always believed in the paranormal, but I shrugged it off, not wanting to overthink it. Later that day, we went out for lunch, and when we returned, I found all my belongings that I'd neatly placed in the closet scattered across the floor. My friend explained that the closet was his space, and that the spirit probably didn't like me putting my things in there. Still skeptical, I assumed it was her little brother messing around and put everything back. Then I went to take a shower. That was a mistake. The bathroom had no vents, no windows, and the air conditioning wasn't running. While I was showering, the curtain suddenly blew inward with full force, hitting me. It scared me half to death. I gathered all my courage and peeked out, but no one was there. What was even weirder was the steam on the walls. I hadn't been using hot water, but condensation was dripping, and it was red. I quickly left the bathroom and went to find my friend, who was asleep on the couch. I asked if she'd opened a window or done anything to mess with me, but she hadn't even woken up. When I went back to the bathroom, there was a swirl drawn into the steam on the mirror. Later, I told her about what had happened. She was shocked and said, "I guess he doesn't like you. He's never been that bad with anyone else who stayed over. I think it's because you're Catholic and wearing a cross." I once tried putting holy water and candles in the room, but he knocked everything over when I came back in. At that point, I was seriously wondering, what am I doing here? She went on to explain how things had started in the house. Everything had been fine when they first moved in. But one night, she woke up to the smell of something burning. She searched the house but found nothing and went back to bed. Then, she woke up again. Her closet light was on, the balcony doors were open, and the overhead lights in her room were blazing. At the same time, the fire alarm went off. When she opened her bedroom door, the alarm went silent. Figuring it was someone burning something outside or maybe even her sleepwalking, she went back to bed. But it happened again. This time, the fire alarm near her mom's room went off, and the burning smell, like singed hair, was stronger. Her dog started barking furiously at the closet, then bolted out of the room. He barked at her bedroom door but refused to go back inside. This went on for hours until she finally gave up and crawled into her mom's bed to sleep. Since then, small, eerie incidents have been a daily occurrence. On my last night there, everything seemed calm. I went to bed with the balcony door slightly open, secured with a large rock to keep it from moving. The rock weighed at least 25 pounds, so I wasn't worried about anything messing with it. Around 3 a.m., the infamous witching hour, I woke up to chaos. Every light in the room was on, the television was blasting, and my friend was sound asleep. Her dog stood frozen, staring at the closet. To my horror, the balcony door was wide open, and the heavy rock was now outside on the balcony. I knew it couldn't have been the dog. The rock was far too heavy. I tried to stay calm because I felt like the spirit fed off fear. So I did the only thing I could think of. I spoke to it. "If you want to watch TV, that's fine," I said aloud. "I'm just turning the volume down so I can sleep." I lowered the volume, crawled back into bed, and somehow managed to fall asleep. That was my experience in Vegas, and it left me shaken. I've always believed in ghosts, but this was something else, completely unexplainable.